Hello, my good ones. This video comes out thanks to your support. This is a story about one stroke who started a group of students to survive among chaos after their excursion goes awry. And it all started with the fact that he began to tell him that he needed to end everything and the best way out to just give up. He already thought that it was the end of his 16-year life, and it was necessary to immediately change something. But there was only one accident that was able to turn everything upside down and completely change his life. Mother began to shout that the police were lying and her son could not die just at the moment. She was unbearably painful to accept this information, and in general, at first, she just did not want to hear about it. After all, this fact would completely change her life, and it was impossible to somehow save her or at least help with something. All of them should soon go to high school, and, in principle, this fact could not be changed in any way. The girl also began to say that they need to use this opportunity and not to lose it now. After all, it was at this moment that they can say that they had kept deep down for so long and were silent about it. Therefore, they decided to tell all their desires because it was the best solution at the moment in their opinion. One guy began to say that he wanted to win in all high school and stay on top. Immediately after that, they began to say all their desires because they were sure that they could definitely come true. One hero immediately began to call his mother and tell her that he will never be so frivolous in his life. Also, she began to tell her that he did not need to worry about him and he would definitely arrive home at once, as he could. But she told him that there is no need to dream a lot, but simply act, and only then he could come out of everything. Also, one man was very surprised that there was always a very large flow of cars on this road, and now he did not see a single one. He immediately got a feeling that there was no end at all, and it even began to scare him, because it was very strange. Here, at one point, the girl began to say that one of their company was still silent, and it was not normal. Although the hero simply talked with your mother, and for him at that time, this conversation was the most important. The heroine began to tell him that this is his last chance to express everything that was now in his heart. There was no need to miss such a chance, and be sure to do everything in order to be able to hear it now. She turned to him for a very long time, but the guy decided to simply not react to her words now. This conversation was now very important for him, and he decided to do everything in order to end it normally. But the girl was tired of waiting, and she began to shout that she was like a young man endlessly now. Of course, everyone heard this, because she screamed about this fact and did not hide it at all. So of course everyone paid attention. Many of her friends began to laugh at her because she was the most beautiful at school and admitted to someone in love. Also, one man began to say that he was very lucky because such a beautiful girl wanted him. But he was also very surprised by the fact that the guy was not immediately delighted with such recognition. The driver of the car rode, and at all could not understand why it was more difficult for him to see the road with every kilometer. At one point, he just saw what surprised him as much as possible and simply could not believe his eyes. It was difficult to accept the fact that happened to them, and in general, it was almost impossible at the moment. The girl began to cry very much and said that in principle she understands everything and could not have anything against it. Here, the car began to slow down because the driver was very scared and did not know what to do next. The young man began to look at her very accurately and did not say anything yet, but his thoughts were mixed. He very sharply grabbed the girl by the hand and began to say that she needed to be much more careful. She was very surprised at such an act and could not understand at all why he did this now. Therefore, immediately began to ask her partner what he was doing in general and why did he need it now. The guy immediately began to approach her and turned out that he kissed her right in front of everyone. Of course, this was very embarrassed by the heroine, and she began to say that all classmates are now looking at them. But he did not want to listen to his partner at all and just began to shout that everyone was bent now. After this, the car crashed, and all the glass that was on the windows shattered and could damage those present here now. Of course, they were all very scared, because they did not expect that this situation would happen to him now. The car was badly damaged, and it was necessary to immediately decide what to do with this. Literally a few minutes later, the news has already said that today the transport on the road has suffered very much. The bus was full of students, and they crashed into a pillar very sharply. Also said that the number of wounded and dead is now hard to count. The most strange fact was that the police closed the place of the tragedy, not even allowing doctors to enter the sake of help. Therefore, so that they can find out at least the truth, their team decided to go on and see everything. After all, it was necessary to find out everything that happened there. A lot of children were injured, and it was impossible to leave it just like that. The girl was confident in her abilities and really wanted to do everything to find out the truth. Here at one point her camera suffered and she could not understand who did this and why. Of course, she was even a little scared because she certainly did not expect her life there would be some threats now. A group of people began to tell her that she did not need to climb into affairs, which no one asked her at all. They began to say that she violates the rights of freedom, and in general secrets, it was not necessary to reveal this. Of course, she stood on her own and began to say that she would definitely recognize the truth and tell her the whole world. It was impossible to leave this one because her obligation to reveal the truth and tell everyone about it. And of course, the guy did not like her confidence very much, and he decided that he had to come up with a plan. He also began to look at the floor and realized that there is some kind of amazing thing that needs to be studied. The girl began to tell him that this is some kind of familiar smell and had to know everything about him. She also saw strangers and began to shout that no one let them out here and they could not come in so simply. The policeman began to tell them that it was impossible to cross and leave the scene of the accident when she wants. It was wrong. Therefore, he began to prescribe to them about the fact that it was necessary to leave right now and not at all appear at all here. He also wanted to threaten them and began to say that if they continue to stand here, he would certainly take measures. But at one point, the guy grabbed the policeman's hand and clearly wanted to tell him everything that right now to mind about him. The policeman began to shout that he was very painful and he could no longer tolerate such torment. It was a special intelligence department, and they needed to do everything in order to find out as much information as possible. He began to show his certificate and was sure that he could simply do everything in the world. This department was special investigations that never tried to hide or in what to lie to people. Of course, the policeman was very upset and could not understand why they came here so simply and did not listen to him. He began to worry very much, but in principle he realized that there was no need to argue with anyone and just admit his guilt. It was an accident. More than 10 students were injured, and now we are very bad. The man began to say that it was very strange because they could not find any evidence against this accident. Therefore, it was necessary to look much more because they had to find at least some help that helped them. They also found a corpse that looked as terrible as possible, and it was not the same as it should be usually. At the moment, they could not recognize who exactly was, so it was necessary to wait for special tests. After all, this is the only way they will find out who exactly this is and how they can contact his relatives at the moment. The guy began to look at him, and he was as interesting as possible why his body became how terrifying now. A policeman approached them and began to ask if they were able to find at least anything now. It was important. One girl began to scream very much and asking for her to be allowed now because there may be her friend. After that, she began to shout that they were deceiving her, and there definitely cannot be her own son now. The girl began to beg them to drop her, and she was able to find out the truth because she simply could not touch her anymore. The policeman began to say that this woman lived with her only son, but still an accident occurred. The husband began to look at her, and he very much wanted to understand what exactly she was feeling at the moment. Therefore, I decided to just offer her to talk, because now it was the best solution for her. Every time, wherever they were, the hero simply hated zones that there were no clues or any evidence. The policeman tried to calm the girl and did everything so that she would stop worrying so much. She cried very much and shouted that she wanted to see him now and simply could no longer endure or wait. This was her last hope, and Mother believed as much as possible that it was not her son, and they simply made some mistake. The bus was injured as much as possible, and it was very difficult to find out what caused such an accident. Of course, she was worried as much as possible for her son, and simply could not believe what happened now. Finally, he already woke up and she was able to see him because she simply drained his nerves as much as possible. His head was very ill and he simply did not feel and did not remember what happened to him at all. And he could not even feel his hand, of course. This was the most frightened by the guy at the moment, because this never happened. The man did not remember what happened to him, and why he was now experiencing just such a pain in himself. He lay on the floor and simply could not believe what happened to him, because his head simply stopped taking some facts. The hero felt maximum pain and could no longer understand anything and perceive us on his own expense. It was very difficult. The girl ran to him and immediately began to ask his well-being, because the Maximum was very worried about her attacker. She also immediately ran up to him and began to hug him and was very happy that he was alive and, in principle, everything was fine with him. The hero was very surprised at such a reaction, because he himself did not even manage to understand what exactly happened to him. The husband simply could not understand where they were at all and what happened to him at the moment. Also immediately began to ask where his other partners, because in general I would understand them where they could go. The girls began to be reviewed and simply could not tell him anything, realizing what happened to them. One girl began to point her finger up and say that now they are in that place. The hero looked at her and could not understand at all why she began to speak exactly so now. She also began to explain to him that they were exactly the same until they had awakened, and they were not at least better. It was difficult for him to accept this fact, and in general the man did not quite understand where they were and what happened to them all. The girl immediately ran up to him and began to ask if it could be that but it was very difficult for her to say. She was afraid to say this phrase, but after some time she began to tell him that perhaps they had already died. Of course, it was very difficult for them to talk about this, but she simply did not have another explanation before this situation now. The hero simply could not understand what was happening at all, and where he is now, he really did not like it. It was necessary to find out what happened to them at all, and why he now feels as if he was no longer here. He also began to hear that people told them very much and could not understand where they were now. Everyone shouted as much as possible, and it was difficult for them to understand what to do next. But they knew for sure that this was a very bad picture. They could not understand at all where they were, and there was nothing around them. They just were left alone without anyone. No one could believe in this picture, and many thought that they had already died and would never be able to return again. This made fear as much as possible on them, and they were very worried about the fact that they could already be lifeless. It was necessary to immediately find out everything and do everything in their power, because it was necessary to get out of this place. This situation looked as strange as possible, and they tried to inspect the terrain because they were sure that it could help them. They began to examine everything around them, and they needed to find out simply every small detail that could help. All of them were worried as much as possible and perfectly understood that perhaps they would never see a normal life again. There was no clue at all, and it was necessary to look for at least something because it was their only hope for salvation. They tried to support each other, and everyone wanted to say that the main thing they remained together and it would be easier. After all, companies have always been easier to get out of problems, and at any time they will be able to help each other. It was necessary to just hold together and not go far. Everyone should be a bunch, and only then they can save themselves. Therefore, they tried to do everything completely so that no bad adventures occurred and they were all alive. At one point, they simply saw that some very large, thick white fog began to cover them. The guy began to say that this fog was as strange as possible because he was very thick and it was clearly abnormally. They began to think about what happened to them at all, and it was difficult for them to fully realize the whole situation. The man began to talk about this, that a good girl should go, because those who wanted to help her, the largest number, will be. Of course, the hero began to listen to all these words, and he did not really like what they were now talking right in front of him. It was necessary to think very well about this situation and not to do actions, which then it would be possible to regret it very much. The teacher was lost consciousness, and the driver generally disappeared, so they simply did not understand what to do next at the moment. There was a very large fog and nothing was visible besides him, because this situation was very frightened by everyone. The little boy approached them and began to ask who in such a situation could help find the police. But a person will be able to have a very great authority, and, of course, he will help everyone very much in this case. The guy began to scream and told everyone that it was he who could leave now and find out everything. Of course, they all expected some actions from him and were sure that he could not defeat it all completely. After all, you need to have a lot of effort and inspiration so that he can overcome and find out what happened to them. They began to worry everything very much because they perfectly understood exactly what consequences could happen to that guy. But he only shouted that they would all stay here and he would go and find the police and finally could find out everything. He also began to calm them down and assured his partners that everything would be fine, so there was no need to worry. They still had no other way out, so this fact had to be accepted and everything was necessary to be saved. Of course, they did not know what exactly would be next and how they should overcome all these fears, because it would really be as difficult for them. The guy began to look at the fog and was sure that something was obviously not so and could not just end. He was as much as possible as much as that it was not even visible in him, and this event very much surprised him. It is impossible for such a situation, so it was necessary to immediately solve it and deal with it as soon as possible. Also, at one point, he realized that he could not move at all, and this fact frightened him at that time as much as possible. Just the hero stopped understanding what to do next, and how can he get out of this situation now? He also began to look at his feet and simply could not believe his eyes, because what he saw looked as terrible as possible. Also, his hands began to become exactly the same, and he simply did not understand what to do with how to save himself. He began to scream very much, but none of his partners could understand what happened to him now. But everyone knew for sure that the situation is as terrible as possible, and it was necessary to immediately somehow save him now. The hero begged for help, because he knew very well that only they could now save him from this terrible fog. The man begged for help as much as possible and really hoped that at least someone would now lead to him at the moment. But his hands began to hurt as much as possible, and he perfectly understood that he no longer feels most of his body. It was terrible as possible to guess what would happen next and how exactly they would go with them. They did not know how to react to them at all, and in general, what you can help your old age now. Here he began to shout that it was necessary to build some kind of plan, because without him they simply could not save his partner. He needed help, and immediately needed to do everything in order to save him and not even think about the consequences. Also, one man began to say that he should give all his clothes, as they can help him. There was no need to have outerwear now, because it is very harmful, and you can't keep them at all. Therefore, of course, all those present began to take off all their outerwear, because they were sure that this would at least somehow save them. It was necessary not to think for a very long time and do everything so that they could save themselves, and at the same time they're older. From their clothes, they began to make a rope that could help him get out of there, because now it was their only way out of the situation. Therefore, they began to shout to him a plan of their actions, because it was necessary to warn him about it, and that he was ready for any events. Of course, the man was already very poorly aware of at least something, and it was difficult for him to grab even the same lace. His hands were in a terrible state, and he almost did not feel them, so it was as difficult for him to take this step. The guys began to pull it out and hoped very much that it could definitely save them to the older. But at one point they began to understand that the fabric simply could not stand it, and it would very soon break right in their hands. The hero tried to do everything as much as possible to save his partner, and he did not experience any problems at all. Finally, they began to see some kind of salad from a thick fog and were sure that they were their elders. They were all very scared for him and could not even imagine what exactly they would see now, and this would very much frighten them. There was almost no living place on it, and he just shouted that this fog was incredibly terrible and had to save himself. They all began to understand that the fog disappeared somewhere, and this fact began to frighten them all as much as possible. In general, it was very difficult to believe in the situation that now happened to them, and they simply did not suspect anything. The whole company was afraid as much as possible, and they simply did not know what to do next, and how could they save themselves. Therefore, they decided that it would not be. They must find out the truth, because of this fog, their partner suffered. His condition was as terrible as possible, and, of course, they could not save him. This fact upset the company as much as possible. The man looked at the fruits and talked about the fact that they looked fresh, but when they touched, they immediately burst. This world was as strange as possible, and no one could understand where they got. How could they save themselves? The guy also watched, and it was very difficult for him to understand how he could save the company and what to do now. They were all very confused, and many began to understand that they would never return their lives before. The fog was simply terrible, and with every minute it became worse and worse, so they began to understand that they would no longer save themselves. One guy began to scream to his partner and said that he was constantly crying, and this is already starting to bother everyone. But he only said that he really wanted to go home and is simply afraid to find out what would happen to him next. The guy began to scream even more at him and said that he was actually a guy and behaves like some little girl. Because of this, he became much more offensive, and he began to cry even more because he did not understand what to do next. They were all as scared as possible, and everyone wanted to take themselves at least something to distract themselves from bad thoughts. The hero began to draw different words with a wand, because he hoped that perhaps this would save him at least from his fear. One guy approached him and began to ask what he was doing here in general, and why did he need it. He began to explain to him that it was necessary to somehow use the already well-known facts and some details with the situation. At one point, the man began to shout that their teacher came to his senses, and perhaps this could now help them. But he himself did not understand where he was now and what to do now. His head was terribly ill. He also began to ask them where the car and the driver were going on. This situation began to surprise him very much. The teacher could not understand at all where they are now and began to worry about their students and for themselves, but immediately began to ask one student why they are not on the bus and what happened to them at all. He began to worry as much as possible and already understood that they were probably in the terrible situation now. Also, they all were silent and did not tell him anything at all. It frightened him even more, and he did not understand what to do next. One guy began to ask him to just be silent, because now no one can find an explanation in this situation. If they knew at least something for a long time could save themselves, and there was no need to make a sacrifice now, because they were all afraid. Of course, the teacher did not understand how to react to such events at all, because he simply could not guess what happened. One girl immediately ran to the guy and began to hug him because she was much better. The husband immediately began to ask her what happened at all and why did she begin to behave just like that. But she explained to him that she really wanted to go to the toilet and was simply afraid to go herself, so she needed support. Of course, he was most surprised at such words because he simply could not expect that she would turn to him with such a request. It was very inconvenient, but the girl perfectly understood that she had no other way out now, so it was necessary. Of course, she just really wanted to do her business very much and realized that she certainly could not go and cope. Therefore, the heroine began to do her business and was very grateful to the guy who decided to go with her now. She also began to tell him that it was not necessary to return because she was as strong as much as possible to him. Her friend began to scream that she did not need to worry and she would now cover her and will watch the guy. She sat and understood that she had acted as terrible as possible and she was ashamed because of the situation that had just happened. Of course, her friends did not say anything at all because they perfectly understood that this could happen just with everyone. This situation drove everyone into an uncomfortable position and, in principle, understood that it was necessary to be brave in order to dare to do this. It was necessary to somehow change this topic because they could not just be silent and wait for it to cope. Also, after that, her friend began to ask what was in his hand at all now. The guy simply said that it was their elder's clothes and he could not let him go right now. The girl was very surprised and began to ask if their head man was now gone now. Therefore, he immediately began to explain to her the whole situation that happened to them a few hours ago. They all began to understand that they would have to sit here for sure and just wait for the moment as they all die. This fog was incredibly terrible, and many of them began to understand that they could not escape from it at all. Of course, the girl did not like such an answer as much as possible, and she was sure that she needed to find a solution to the problem. It was necessary to find at least some food, because without it their salvation at the moment was simply impossible. The girl began to thank the guy very much for the fact that he nevertheless agreed to go with her. But she did her job. She also began to ask what happened to them at all, because their faces changed as much as possible. Of course, they did not want to scare anyone, so the first time they decided to just be silent because everyone was already very worried now. Many of them began to ask when you could not return at all, and finally, will they have an ordinary life again? But no one had an answer to this question because they perfectly understood that this could even be impossible. Everyone was as upset as possible, and they simply did not understand what to do next and how to get out of this situation. Also, many of them have already begun to say that they were very hungry, and it was necessary to somehow solve this problem now. The company began to recall that they took cookies with them on the road, so it was necessary to find it now. But one guy began to say that he was no longer there now, because even at that time, he was as few as possible. The girl began to cry very much and say that she was hungry and cannot withstand such a feeling now. They all were very evil of each other and perfectly understood that perhaps even more would not be disadvantaged and would not return. The girl also noticed that the guy ate cookies and did not want to share with anyone now. It was terrible on his part. Therefore, he simply began to scream very much and said that he must definitely share with him. But the hero began to shout that it was his food, so he is not obliged to share with someone now. If she so much wanted to eat from home to take something with her, because the heroine understood that the road would be very large. The guy tried to calm everyone and talked about the fact that they could die, so they should stay together. It was impossible to quarrel so much with each other only for the sake of cookies. Perhaps they would generally not live more. Also immediately began to eat cookies and attacked it very much because he was as hungry as possible. One partner approached him and began the storm with his foot because he was sure that he also did not share with anyone either. They were already ready to quarrel with each other because this situation was the most strongly frightened by all of them. The teacher has long taught his subordinates that it was necessary to share with each other, But obviously, the children did not learn this lesson. It was necessary to do at least something, because in a different way they would not be saved, and each of them would be terribly dying. The husband immediately began to explain to the teacher that this was not his cookies at all, and he really did not want to take him. But he was even more angry, and he began to say that now we need to be a team and somehow save each other. It was impossible to think only about yourself, because each of them was in the same situation. Now it was bad for everyone. It was necessary to save each other, and not to make sure that each of them would get worse and worse. Therefore, he simply began to talk about the fact that they should turn out all of me and share with others. He also began to scream at them and said that from that moment they would all obey him. All friends began to understand that the teacher probably just lost his mind, and it was necessary to immediately do at least something with this. Of course, many of them began to be very afraid of very much, and they did not understand what to do next with all this. But the teacher only continued to repeat that they must give him all his food completely. After all, they could not treat their teacher so soullessly and had to think only that he would survive now. Also began to tell them that this fog would still not give them a chance to survive. Therefore, it was necessary to immediately look for some kind of solution because they had very little time and there was almost no hope either. They all perfectly understood that they would probably quarrel very much, and none of them would communicate after that moment. But now, it was not the most important, because they were very worried and did not know and how they could save themselves. The teacher began to scream and said that they must listen to him and did not need to think somehow differently. He also began to call students one at a time and simply said that they must give him all the food. Therefore, they themselves began to call each other in turn and said that the best option would obey him. Of course, one guy did not want to obey the teacher and simply began to say that there is always another decision. Therefore, he began to attack him and said that they are all in the same situation and each of them would like to eat. It was just some kind of teacher to anyone. So there was no need to be so afraid of and listen so much. They could not give all the food to him simply because he wanted so much, because they also wanted to eat. It was necessary to stay somehow by the company, because only in this way they were able to save themselves. It was impossible to think only about themselves. Therefore, the teacher at first decided to just succumb and said that he understood everything and does not behave like that anymore. But he said that if he wants to pick up all his food, then let him go and do it right now. They all tried to calm him down and said that there was no need to do such actions now. But the guy assured them that he was not at all afraid of him, so he would definitely be all right with him. No person can behave like that, especially in such a situation. It was necessary to think about everyone. Therefore, there was no other choice, and it was just necessary to deal with such a teacher who did not respond at all. But he was sure of his victory, because he decided to deceive the student and held a weapon in his hand. Of course, everyone was very scared when they saw this, because their classmate was as important as possible to them. Therefore, they began to shout to him that he immediately moved away from him and never came up at all. All of them were very afraid for him and were sure that now there's no need to lose anyone from the company. But the teacher no longer wanted to move away from his and committed the same act that frightened everyone as much as possible. The hero began to download about how much he hurt, because these feelings were simply impossible to convey to the second. Of course, all of them were very scared and began to understand perfectly well that he had to beware and not to be connected at all. And he continued to say that he needs to obey him, because only in this way they can survive in this situation. The man lay on the highway and felt maximum pain, but still said that he was somehow too confident in himself. Of course, you just started laughing and talked about the fact that he could make him so painful at any moment. Immediately after that, he grabbed one guy, but he was very worried and did not know how to react to this. The teacher simply began to shout that they would not save and therefore let them listen to him right now. The hero began to cry and simply begged for him to save him, even if someone could continue. The man began to shout that they could not get out at all, so there was no need to hope for it. Of course, the whole company was very surprised as possible, and their beginning is incredibly annoying. The teacher continued to say that they looked around. No one could save them now. Everywhere there was just a terrible fog and they did not have a single chance of salvation. It was not necessary to hope. There are no rules at all now and everyone can live simply as he wants. No one can even order for this. Therefore, the teacher began to say that he really likes this place and he simply loves this. Also immediately after that, the company told the company that no one would get out of here alive, so everything could be done. They all perfectly understood that with his head, clearly something was wrong and it was just necessary to ignore him. Also, they all began to want to eat as much as possible and every hour, at least one of them lost consciousness. They were still children, so it was very difficult for them to adapt to such a situation and control themselves. But at this moment, they still did not know that it would not be the worst that would happen to them in their entire life. The girl sat completely alone and she just cried because she was most worried as possible and did not know what to do. They all perfectly understood that they might simply not survive and would never meet with anyone again. Soon the moment that all of them is at a dead end and simply will not give any chance of salvation should come. Since the accident, the police have not given any compromises and there are still no news of the missing. Right now, they could see how the police department gathered a very large crowd of people who were worried about their relatives. Several days have passed, and they did nothing in order to save a very large number of people. Many parents cried and talked about the fact that their children were there, and it was impossible to relate to this so indifferent. They just have to give them at least some explanations, because it was impossible to treat their children so impudently. A lot of days passed, and they did nothing at all in order to at least somehow save this situation. The girl went to the guy and began to ask what they would do in this situation in general. The guy only told her that they still could not find a portal, so there was no sense in this. But he ordered her to continue to search, because he had a great patience, and he will be able to wait until they find him. The girl began to tell him that they could not hold out for a long time, so it was necessary to do it faster. Still, she felt sorry for the little children, because they were not stiff precisely to such conditions and generally survival. A large crowd of people simply shouted to the police that they should do everything in order to find them. The girl began to shout that they must find his son because it was their duty. She could not let him go so easily and perfectly understood that she could not live without her only son. The girl simply watched this all and said that there are constantly such people who scream the most. But the heroine began to say that she fully understands what she was talking about and could not so easily let this situation. The husband only calmly said that now there is a very large fog and they could not do anything about it. The hero began to look at him and ask who was her son at all and what was his name. It was very important for him now. They began to explain to him that it was a ninth-grade student and was now in that place. They began to show them his photo and were sure that it could definitely help. Mother stood all in tears and simply begged unlimitedly that they would find him and bring him home now. She loved him endlessly and could not abandon her only child who was so hard for him. The husband simply began to look at her and clearly wanted to tell her everything that he was now thinking about her in the face. But he simply told the woman that she remains, and he would certainly do everything that was now in his power. Of course, she agreed, because it was at least some hope that they could find him and the son to leave him alive. So they started talking to her, and the main character asked when she even realized that he was gone. It was difficult for the woman to speak as hard as possible, but she still decided to tell him about one situation. Therefore, she just began to tell that she had one dream, as amazing for her, as if her son was in some fog and just begged for help, because he himself could not get out of him, and he was very bad. She tried her best to help him, but she did not succeed, just her body froze in place. That is why a dream she decided that her son was in a very great trouble and had to immediately find him. At one point, she just began to understand that he sometimes appears to her and just asks for help as much as possible. Unfortunately, she can't help him at all, and this is constantly upset by the mother. His hand seems to just disappear, and immediately after that she wakes up and understands that it was just her dream. She simply cannot forgive herself this, which does not save him. She just can't do it. She just constantly called her son, but she realized that how much he did not want and could not get to her. The heroine also put all her strength completely in order to save him, but simply could not. These dreams were as strong as possible, and the mother just wanted to save her little son, who so needed her. Not a single night she had passed calmly, because she just could no longer live like that. It was necessary to immediately help him. At this time, the hero tried to somehow save himself and understood that it was necessary to fight right to the last sigh. The heroine began to say that she saw him, and confidently he was still alive, so he needed immediate help. Of course, the man listened to this story and was surprised as much as possible, because the first time he heard at least something like that. Perhaps it was the same portal and it really existed now. It was necessary to find out now such a fact. Mother cried very much and began to beg them to find her son, because she simply could not live without him now. Her tears began to drip, and in the water she saw him again. It was as difficult to explain as much as possible, but it still happened. When she looked at the bowl, she simply could not believe her eyes. It was incredible and impossible. Therefore, immediately began to scream the name of her son, and none of the audience could understand what happened to her now. Also, after the mother began to scream, the man returned very sharply, and this fact was even more surprised by everyone who was now. His company began to ask what happened to him at all, and he replied to hear a familiar voice. But literally, a few seconds later, I was already sure that it seemed to him now. The girl still continued to cry and was very worried about the whole situation that had now happened to them. And her friend began to say that she was very weakened and she immediately needed to find at least some food. The guy began to look at the teacher who took all their reserves and now enjoyed their food. Therefore, without thinking for a long time, he decided that he needed to save his girlfriend in spite of any problems. They all were very hungry and perfectly understood that they obviously could not last at such a pace for a very long time. It was impossible to continue to do just that, and it was necessary to immediately solve this problem. The girl was generally exhausted as possible, and her appearance was simply terrible. But the teacher only said that now they had a big brawl for food and had to fight. Although the guy was sure that he would not necessarily give a bid and do everything to have at least a little, it was impossible to torment people so much, and it was necessary to immediately come up with at least something in order to escape. The teacher simply began to mock them and wave all his bags. Of course, this is the beginning of everyone to annoy as much as possible, and they wanted to do everything to take it from him. But the teacher simply began to threaten them, and they all perfectly understood that they had no other way out. The children simply began to scream that they want to eat, and he is now mocking them. But he was far from indifferent, and he continued to do what he did before, just defiantly in front of them, and did everything in order to cause them even more desire. He began to eat in front of them, and of course, this annoyed them very much, and they could not tolerate this. The whole group was very hungry and evil for what their teacher was doing in front of them now. He just sat and mocked them, because he perfectly understood that they were all afraid of him. Therefore, he continued to eat exactly so that they saw and could not do anything at all now. He just sat and ate in front of them and did everything in order to cause them an incredible anger. One guy still decided and began to say that he was very hungry now. The teacher was very surprised by such courage and could not understand why he did this. This fact acquired it as much as possible, but he continued to ask if he was sure, After that, he received one chip scene and said that he still remembers him. Previously, the hero constantly complained to his father about this teacher because he did not love him very much. He also began to ask him if he correctly remembered all the situations that they had. Of course, it became very inconvenient and he did not understand at all what to do in such a situation now. The teacher began to tell him that he would like to eat is not forbidden, so this is normal. But he needs to run 2 circles, only then he will be able to get his food. Of course, they were all as much as possible and could not understand why he began to behave like that. The teacher again repeated his order to him because he decided that he simply did not completely hear him. Immediately after that, the student began to say that he was no longer hungry and did not want anything else. The husband simply began to laugh and said that he was with character, but this would not help him. After all, they have not eaten anything for 3 days, so very soon they will begin to lose all their strength. And the 5th day has already come and the man corrected him, because he was sure that perhaps he would regret them. The 10th day has already come and they were generally as hungry as possible and did not understand what to do next. It was necessary to stick as much as possible, but they had less and less strength. These were the most terrible days, and the whole company understood that they still could not without loss. Many of them have already lost all the forces that they had and told it was simply impossible. They all began to obey the teacher and understood that only he could give them at least a little food now. Therefore, it was necessary to do all his whims, and they understood that the only way they could survive. Of course, he constantly only laughed at them and did everything so that they humiliated themselves. He really liked this work, and he just tried to take revenge on them for all times. He also began to blame his father and said that now he could not help him. Of course, they all tried to somehow please him and did not even quarrel with the teacher. There was no point in showing his character now because only in this way he gave at least a little food. Of course, they were all very scared and did not understand how they could save themselves. The teacher simply mocked them, and so that they would not do, he did not even want to give crumbs of bread. Immediately after that, he crushed his food with his foot and said that he missed and did this, like, not intentionally. He began to point to the food that was lying on the floor and said that only this could offer him. The hero looked at her very much, and his desire to eat at least something was incredibly great. Therefore, he still decided to try, because he simply could no longer endure this. It was necessary to eat at least something, just a person who understood that he could not stand without food a little more. He was very bad and he began to eat from the floor and is very glad that he got at least something. It was incredibly tasty, and he had never appreciated food so much in his life. It was incredibly tasty and he attacked her as if it was really his only salvation. The teacher began to shout that who would obey him, so he would give some kind of food. Everyone was as exhausted as possible, and they began to understand what he needed to be submitted. They had no other way out now, so it was necessary to do everything to survive. The man began to talk about what he wants to make them obedient, so he does it. Of course, they simply did not have the strength to think and in general to solve at least something. It was terrible. The whole company was as hungry as possible, and they understood that at least something was needed in such a long time. Therefore, one of the guys simply approached him and said that he was also ready to do this. But his partner grabbed his hand and wanted to explain that it was impossible to lead this. He told him that he simply stood and did not go anywhere now. But he began to explain that he is as very hungry as possible and simply cannot stand it anymore. The hero began to explain to him that the situation is not as simple as he is now thinking now. He just wants to take power over them all, so there was no need to succumb to this. After all, the teacher was sure that they would now be all over to him, although it was completely wrong. It was impossible to succumb to him so simply in order to saturate your body. Everyone will obey him and he will only do what he wants. It was impossible to allow this. After all, they will simply become their slaves and he will remain here to rule all. Without food, they could survive at least some time, so it was necessary to come up with a plan. The teacher began to look at one girl and told her to take off her clothes. Of course, this surprised as much as possible, and they did not even imagine that he would say that. The teacher continued to order her to take her all her clothes completely. But the girl was surprised at this, because she just expected everything, but definitely not such a request. Therefore, he began to tell her that if she really wants to eat, then let him do what he says. The girl just lay on the floor and really wanted to eat. It was necessary to help her. Her friend worried about her as much as possible and understood that she would have to save her. It was impossible to leave her in trouble because she could just die after that. Although she did not want to undress as much as possible, she knew that there was no other way out now. The teacher began to look at her very evil, and the girl understood what could be right now. Therefore, he told her that you need to be an obedient girl and do everything, or he simply will do this with her and will not even give a drop of food because she did not want to listen to him. It was just necessary to do everything that he would want to me. The only way they could be saved. All of them were worried as much as possible and did not understand what to do next and how to save themselves. The guy shouted to the girl and tried to refuse her such a terrible act. They will still find a way out how to have at least a little food. There was no need to go to such victims. Therefore, the man immediately approached his teacher and wanted to tell him everything that he is now thinking about him. The girl asked for help as much as possible and believed that they could not just leave her. The teacher only continued to say that she should completely take off all the clothes from herself. He also ordered her to do it much faster because he simply does not want to wait long. It was required to do this as soon as possible, and only in this way she will be able to get her portion of food. Of course, the guy began to watch this all and hoped as much as possible that she would not do this. This act would be very terrible, and she could no longer be a little girl. Here, the teacher came and immediately began to ask how she could help them now. Everyone was as surprised as possible when they saw her, because before this woman was not. It turns out that when an accident occurred, everyone was confused for a while, so they could not see it. All the time she watched them, but she was also very difficult to recover at that moment. Therefore, finally it became much easier, and she decided now to help her students who suffered so much. The guy immediately began to talk about the fact that now the situation will be improved and they will be saved. Therefore, they began to look at the teachers and said that in the adult world it is not so simple. The partner said that he cannot think so optimistic because it would be too simple. In this situation, there is clearly some reason, and it was necessary to immediately find it until it was too late. The teacher began to turn to his colleague and was as surprised as possible that she appeared here. Therefore, the heroine began to explain to him that the girl was still very small in order to completely undress herself. Of course, the teacher was very surprised at this and began to tell her that she explained her words. Of course, he began to laugh very much and said that it was just a joke and he would definitely give food. But after that, he immediately began to shout that they would die all the same, so there is no sense. This fog simply could not defeat, and none of them would survive. For several days they have been here, and at all, no one had a single progress. The strangest was the fact that they all did not want to listen, that they themselves did everything to die. Nobody will help them now, because there was no point in playing or showing themselves correctly. The police will not look for them, because this business is simply not interested in them, so there was no sense. For 2.5 days they were here and even no one tried to somehow worry about them. The teacher just began to look at him and wanted to tell everything she thinks now. But he told her that she herself could help the girl simply replace herself with her. She can also undress, and it will be enough for him to enjoy her body. Therefore, he continued to tell her the same thing and was sure that she would agree to this. Of course, she was very surprised and simply could not believe what she hears now. Was he really so terrible because she had loved him before and simply could not believe it? I immediately began to defend the girl and talked that she would not be worried now. She began to look at the teacher and told him that he would do everything he wants now. But now the girl began to scream and told the teacher that there is no need to do this. She just cried very much and told all students to be distracted and not to look. But the teacher ordered no one to turn away, and they watched this process everything. He also began to order her to do this much faster because he could no longer wait. Of course, she was very afraid and did not understand at all why she came to them now. Therefore, they began to take off their shirt and was very worried because others would think about it. Here at one point, one of the companies began to shout that she became and did not do this. The guy decided to join his teacher and was sure that she should not do this. The teacher got as much as possible at him and began to scream that he would die right now. But he was as calm as possible and simply assured him that he knew where they were. Also, in general, he has a lot of information that can now help him. Only he was the only one knew how they could escape and generally survive in this situation, right now. All of them were very surprised at what their partner just said because they simply did not expect this. The teacher also began to ask again and could not believe what the guy was right in front of him now. But he simply calmly repeated that he knew where they are now and they have a very big opportunity to get out of here now. The teacher just came up and began to say that it was not necessary to merge it, because it will end very badly for them. The teacher, in principle, understood that he could deceive and simply wanted to save all his friends, because it was in his interests. Then he began to scream at him and said that no one could so cruelly and meanly deceive him now. Therefore, he immediately began to get a weapon out of his pocket and wanted to tell the guy how to really deceive such a respected person. But he was not at all worried, because he was sure that he knew the right decisions and their salvation. All his friends began to scream because they were very worried about him and understood that he was just deceiving him now. Of course, they began to worry very much for him and understood that perhaps now he would even dislike after that. But the teacher did not understand at all what exactly happened, because the events did not happen at all like it was on ordinary days. The guy looked as strange as possible and he still decided that probably he needed to listen to his information. Perhaps she can really save their life, so it was necessary to at least check this theory right at that moment. The girl began to look at them and ask, do they really not want to get out of here now? After all, it would be great. The teacher began to be very angry, and he could not even believe that such an option now exists. He also began to tell them that they somehow look very strange, and he really does not like it. Of course, they just wanted to hear his theory and hoped that she could help him get out of here. But the guy was silent for the first time and thought for a very long time how to explain it correctly and what to tell him now. The teacher simply expected an answer from him and was sure that he had no option at all. Immediately he began to threaten him and said that if he tries to deceive, this will very poorly affect him. Of course, he just laughed and did not react at all and was not even surprised at his threats right now. Therefore, he simply began to calmly explain that they were stuck in a fog where there was absolutely no connection and other people. At first glance, it may seem that they fell into a trap and no one will look for them. But still, there was one option. The teacher began to talk about the fact that we need to go closer to the point because no one needs very big talk about it. The guy began to say that they are now at the top 10, so you need to remember it now. It was also necessary not to forget that right inside the third transport ring in the city center. Of course, they all did not believe and simply began to say that this is not true and he no longer understands what he says. The husband was also very angry and said that he wanted to deceive them and he did not like it very much. The girl began to say that it was necessary to listen to him because this story also has the right to life. Therefore, they allowed him to continue because they understood that there was still no other way out now. The hero began to say that they looked at the tile at the shop and on the lawn because they were very different. It was necessary to pay attention to this and not forget, because this information was now as important as possible to them. the sidewalk introduced in Parkovna, so this information could be very useful to them in the future. One girl said that she did not even notice this and certainly would not pay attention to such a trifle now. It was also necessary to pay attention to flashlights in the form of colors, because no one has used this style for a very long time. The man also showed the announcement that he found recently, and there was indicated about the city of HK. It was exactly the place where they had an accident, so there simply could not be such coincidences, especially in one place. Of course, they were delighted that they could at least recognize their whereabouts, but this would not help them now. Also, none of them could understand if they are in the garden, why still no one could find them. Also, no one had a connection at all. It was not like some city because this certainly did not happen. The guy began to explain that this is the most mysterious place, and no one could ever get out of it. It was just very strange. As soon as they can find them here, they will have a lot of chances to survive and wait for them to be saved. But this fog killed several people, so it was necessary to be as careful as possible, but not to make any sudden movements. They were all very worried that the fog could again pick up a person and no one else would return him. Of course, they needed to protect themselves as much as possible and obviously unbearable some very bad stories. One man went to the guy and began to ask if he wants to save them at all, or, on the contrary, just kill them. Of course, they all began to wait for an answer because they simply could not trust anyone at this stage more. They all began to worry strongly, and no one else could guess what exactly they should do at the next moment. But they should have probably used his idea, because now they still had no more salvation and hope. It was necessary to do at least something so that they could get out of this terrible place. Of course, the guy was a little upset because his friends could not trust him, but in principle, he could explain this. The teacher simply began to be very angry and told him that he could not ensure their safety and salvation now. Of course, he could not answer anything at all because he perfectly understood that he had no evidence of his assumptions. Therefore, I just decided to say that he himself would go to look, and he does not need their help if they are afraid. They already had at least a little bit in food, and this could help them gain new strength and energy. The man began to say that he would completely give everything that he was required now. They were all as hungry as possible, and simply incredibly happy from the fact that they had at least a little food. The teacher began to talk about the fact that he could cloud only when he finds a way out. After all, if he does not, he will have to be the first to say goodbye to his life. Well, they were all very scared and understood that he was at least trying to do something for salvation. But the guy simply said that he could not worry, because he himself will disappear in the fog if he does not find a way out. The teacher simply laughed and said that he would not leave this so simply and will surely take revenge on him. Immediately after that, he took the poor girl and began to threaten that he would harm them after that. But her sister began to worry very much for her and said that he could not touch her. The teacher simply threatened and said that they had a very good relationship, so he would harm her. Therefore, it was not necessary to trick or at least somehow try to get around it now. Of course, they all began to worry very much for her and understood that he could do everything in general. Therefore, the guy was sure that he would just do everything that was now in his power. Immediately began to shout that he would let her go because there was no need to suffer a lump. The man also began to explain that at least 3 people need his plan. After all, he will not be able to do everything that he has now conceived to his head now. The teacher said that he certainly could not leave because he should stay here in place. Therefore, he immediately began to ask his subordinates who is generally wanting to go with him now. They all were silent because no one wanted to say goodbye to his life, but did not trust his plan. Finally, at least someone who agreed to go with him and help the guy turned out to be. Everyone was very surprised at such a decision because they certainly did not expect that he would leave. The guy himself was also very surprised because he expected everyone, but certainly not his. Of course, he did not argue because he was simply glad that at least someone believed him. He just asked him, is he sure of his decision? One guy was very worried and began to ask if the same thing could happen to them as with the headman. Of course, the guy could not guarantee them security, so he simply said that he himself knew nothing. But they have one small chance and had to be used at least now. It was impossible to miss the opportunity to escape, and it was necessary to use it in full. Therefore, they decided to leave and do everything so that they could save themselves and all. The girl began to worry very much for the guy because she understood how exactly this could end. Even she began to cry and hoped that her lover would return alive and everything would be fine with him. But at one point, she just began to shout that they should not go somewhere. She worried about him as much as possible and simply did not want to let go somewhere now. The guys stood in the place where the headman disappeared last time. It was necessary to protect themselves. Therefore, the guy simply decided to raise his hand and make sure what would happen now. He began to watch his hand, and he was also very interested in what sensations he had. Of course, his partner began to worry very much for him and did not know what would happen next at all. They began to tell him that it was as dangerous as possible and there is no need to take this risk. But there was no other way out now, because this is the only way he could check the safety of his partners. Of course, the guy was very worried, but he knew that it was his idea that had to be tested. Of course, he himself was very afraid and did not know what exactly he was to wait now in this situation. His friends were also very worried and hoped that everything would be fine with him. They simply began to watch this picture and thought that, in principle, they had time to hide. The guy began to check his theory and hoped as much as possible that she would be true. It was necessary to immediately check her, and only he will not be able to find out how to continue to save all his friends. At least he said that the first couple of meters to them there was no danger, so it was possible to go. Perhaps very strange things will happen there, but it was necessary not to forget about the most important rule. No matter how dangerous it would not have been, still, there was no other way out of them now. It was just required to find a safe corner of the fog, and only there they will be able to save themselves. Therefore, he decided to tell his friends that there is no need to go with him further, and he will investigate all the most. Of course, they were very scared and could not believe that he had just told them. The hero simply answered the fact that now there was no other way out, and it was necessary to try at least like that. Friends tried to stop him because they thought that perhaps they saw him for the last time now. The husband began to observe this all and really did not want to lose his partner with this method. They could not just let him go and look at how he himself goes into the unknown. Although none of them could tell him anything at all, maybe just because of fear and unknown. He also began to say goodbye to them because he also suspected that he could never see them again. The hero himself was very worried and did not know what awaited him further and how to react to it. It was required to gain maximum courage and do everything so that it was now in his power. Friends began to talk among themselves and at all could not understand what to do now. They just started screaming his name and were worried as much as possible after what had happened to him. Just a few minutes later, one of them began to ask how his well-being is now. His friends began to scream his name and were very worried about his condition. But at one point, he began to shout that they did not come close to him. With his well-being, everything was fine, but obviously it was now not the best. He himself was very confused, because he certainly did not expect to see that. His finger was simply a terrible state, and was lucky that only he suffered. Of course, they all began to ask if he found exactly what he decided to leave for. But the hero could not answer anything and understood that this did not give him very large results. He began to draw someplace and said that there was no need to forget about him now. If someone goes one further, then it simply will not have any chances to survive in this city. Of course, they temporarily did not understand at all what exactly to do with these. If they want to find at least some clue, it was necessary to cross the border. But all the time he only thought that perhaps the wind could help dispel this fog. In theory, he should get to the place where the same people were, but it was as difficult as possible. If the fog could still accommodate in the wind, then probably a lot of people were not victims. It was necessary to find a solution to this story, because it is simply impossible to determine something differently. It was difficult to find out everything about this situation, because it was as difficult as possible for everyone. Where they gathered all over the hole, the fog is very rare, and they cannot move completely. If, for example, it is possible to divide, the fog can be killed, especially since a person cannot be there for a long time. It almost looked like a fire at night, only every person was a small match. And the more these matches were, the more territory the fire could cover at that moment. It was after this that they began to suspect that all the time could interfere with them. The fog could kill a man around the territory, but only while they were there. It was just necessary not to make a mistake and do everything so that each step was right. After all, if they make at least one mistake, then they will have to say goodbye to life. Of course, this did not reassure them, but at least gave hope for salvation from this situation. Everything had to be done so that they could remember this mysterious fog. Now they had to measure the longest distance, and it is she who will help them in everything. Therefore, they did not turn to their partner and began to ask if he would go with them now. He was very worried, but he realized that he had no very large choice. Therefore, the guy reassures them and simply said that he would try to do it first. Of course, they were afraid to let him go alone, because they knew that together, it would be much easier. If they have already come here, then heaps should stay and help each other. It was impossible to leave this situation so simply, and it was necessary to do everything in their power. Therefore, now his turn was to show the initiative, and it was necessary that he would go first. The head man died in this very fog, and he was very worried about what could happen again. Of course, the guys began to calm him down and say that they had a new theory. Therefore, he believed them and said that he would leave right now and would check it. They all went together and very much hoped that they would not make mistakes at the moment. It was necessary to just hold together and do everything as they discussed a couple of minutes ago. Friends began to talk about what they will certainly be able to, and everything will be fine. But each of them was as worried as possible and understood that it was possible for the last time. The man shook his hands as much as possible, but he knew why he was doing this. It was not necessary to get very nervous, because they can completely ruin their plan. The man began to cry and talked about the fact that he did not want to die just as terrible. Therefore, it was necessary to act at least once, because there was still no other way out now. Everyone was very worried and, in principle, perfectly understood how it could end. The girl wanted to eat as much as possible, and she simply had already lost a lot of her strength. They could simply die from the fact that they had no food and any water at all. It was necessary to save ourselves as they could, because salvation was very close. The teacher did not respond to them in any way and tried to do everything to aggravate these conditions. He was generally indifferent to their suffering and feelings that they had now. The heroine approached him and asked if he could now give them a little to eat a little. After all, if he also continues, then someone will certainly die from hunger. The guy was as angry as possible and simply began to shout that she would get out of here. Of course, the girl began to beg him to give him at least a baby's baby for them. It was impossible to be so cruel, because they did not make him anything bad. The teacher simply began to shout that he was indifferent at all, and the heroine wanted to explain at least something to him, but he was completely indifferent to this. Then she began to scream that they were completely children and should not in anything in front of him. The teacher was as angry as possible and did not even want to listen to him. It was just not interesting for him. At the moment, his duty was to save his life. He did not see anything else. He also began to get up and spoke to her that she was probably just tired of living now. He began to threaten her greatly and was sure that this would frighten the girl now. Also, she began to tell her that they did not need to regret these children because they did not deserve it. The girl still continued to say that with such a pace they would simply die. The hero simply began to laugh and repeated to her that he was completely indifferent to them. Actually, they did not even really know them, so there was no need to worry so much. This food is enough for him much longer if he does not share with anyone now. Of course, such information surprised her as much as possible, and she did not know what to say at all. The girl just sat on the floor and prayed that her friend returned alive. The teacher was very surprised when he heard this, because he certainly did not expect that it would be so. The heroine was very worried about him and was ready for anything to save him. It was evident that she was now as hard as possible, and she was very worried about it. Therefore, she prayed, in spite of everything, even for her well-being, if there were no bad things. And her forces almost ended, and she realized that she could not stretch in such conditions for a very long time. In general, she lost almost all of her strength and had to do everything to somehow help her. The teacher began to shout that that guy had died a long time ago, so there was no need to worry so much for him. It turns out he simply deceived him for the sake of food, so he had no right from the very beginning. She did not want to believe, because she was sure that he would return, and his news would be simply incredible. The heroine began to shout that her friend would definitely return and would not leave her now alone. Of course, he was most surprised that she decided to tell him at least something. This was very angry with him, and he decided that he needed to take revenge on her for this. No one could speak so freely to him and generally master the tone, so she violated all the rules. It was impossible to treat him like that because he was very mistaken in his assumptions. It was just necessary to agree. Of course, he also hoped that they would be able to save them, but this did not happen, so there was no need to think so. There was no more reason to leave this girl, because he constantly threatened her in the same guy. Of course, she began to worry very much for her life, so she tried to say at least something. Of course, the girl began to worry as much as possible and did not understand what to do next. She began to beg him to keep her at all, because her partner must return. I was very pleading for help and hoped that at least anyone would pay attention to it. From the team, no one wanted to react to this at all, knowing that it would be not good for them. Of course, the girl was most surprised at such a reaction and did not think that she would be how it would be indifferent. One of her sister ran to him and began to shout that he would not touch her now. The teacher simply began to threaten her and said that she herself ran into danger. It was impossible now to treat him like that, and it was necessary to respect him as much as possible. She felt a very great pain and realized that she herself certainly could not cope with her. Her sister also began to worry as much as possible for her and realized that she was injured in vain. It was impossible to leave everything that way, and it was necessary to immediately do at least something right now. Previously, he could only watch how she walks, and now he can do everything completely. No one will interfere with him, and he will just do everything that he wants now. It will simply enjoy it, and even no one will save her, because everyone was indifferent. Her only sister lay on the floor and shouted that she would try to save her now. People were as exhausted as possible from hunger, and they could not do anything at all now. The girl just begged for help, but already knew that no one would do this at all. After all, everyone was indifferent to alien mountains, and for them, the most important thing is that no one would touch them. On the other side, the girl noticed a small piece of stones and knew that only they would help her now. There was simply no other way out, and it was necessary to somehow save yourself. While it was possible, the teacher saved her girl and began to reassure and say that the danger is already behind. Of course, she was frightened as much as possible and simply did not understand how to live on after this. I wanted to somehow warn her, because he was already standing for her and was as very angry as much as possible because of their act. Of course, the heroine was frightened as much as possible for her and simply did not know how to save her now. The teacher began to hold her hair and said that, probably, she just really wants to die very much. Therefore, he can help her in this regard, because there was no need to climb into his affairs at that moment. Of course, She immediately felt incredible pain and just shouted that she could no longer endure her. The little girl lay on the floor and just begged for him to let her go and did not touch her anymore. The main character appeared with his friends. They brought food in bags in their hands. The school children joyfully greeted him. The students were glad. They saw Fan Yan in front of them with other guys. Pei showed his friends a bag and said that they found food. Thanks to food, they can still hold out. Hungry school children looked at a bag in which there was a lot of food. School children joyfully ran to their friend Pao Ji and thanked him for the transferred food. The fat man went to the main character and complained that their friend Pei took all his fame. Feng answered joyfully that the most important thing now is that all people have food. The guy came up and noticed how the teacher was sitting on the ground. He asked excitedly what happened to her. The girl scaredly wanted to tell the main character about everything that happened after he left. Fan stopped. He silently looked at his girlfriend. Then he began to guess what happened. The teacher sat and covered the wounded cheek with her hand. Blood was visible. The protagonist glanced to the side. He noticed that there was a girl unconscious. Fan looked displeased to the side. He realized that one guy who was with them was to blame for everything. The main character grabbed the baton. A girlfriend scaredly called him by name. Fan Yan swung his club. He decided to beat her and attack her. The girl scaredly asked the protagonist what was he going to do now. Fan stood with a club in his hands. At this time, a friend went behind the main character, put his hand on his shoulder. Pei, with a confident movement, kept his friend from being beaten by the guy. The main character asked his friend displeasedly, "Does he really want to save the attacker?" Pei carefully looked at the guy lying on the ground. He explained that the criminal must be collectively punished. The guy straightened his glasses and slyly said that the criminal should be condemned. The main character was slightly amazed. He did not understand what a friend had in mind by condemning an attacker. Pei explained with a smile to the interlocutor that they needed to think logically in order to get out of this place. The guy explained to the main character that the mood of people is also very important. Van was sitting in his office. He looked at the girl's photo in the tablet. Behind the guy at the table, Mitao approached the table. She brought in her hands a dish of fruits. A colleague told a reasonable guy that the girl could be a portal. Van held a tablet in his hand. He explained that there is no logic in determining the location of a person. The guy carefully looked at the girl's photo. He touched the screen with a finger. Mi Tao told a colleague that for a long time they could not find the location of students. Suddenly, the guy laughed out loud. He was struck by the words of the girl. Van looked at his girlfriend and said that her naivety is incompatible with her appearance. The guy explained to the girl that it doesn't matter where the school children are. Van began to point a finger at different places of the map. He said that there may be people there. The guy explained to the girl that school children could be anywhere, but not still they could not see or touch them. Van said in a serious voice that first of all, they need to find where the portal is located. The guy explained that after they find the portal, then everything would be easy to solve. Van very realistically imagined a girl lying in the hospital unconscious. Mi Tao told a colleague that 2 weeks have passed since the accident. Van answered reasonably that someone had to detect. Van brought the berry to his mouth. He reminded the interlocutor about the real key. The guy thought about the city that surrounded him and reminded him of this time. The guy came to his senses. He told the people closed with his eyes so that you are not noisy. The attacker abruptly opened his eyes and shouted to people so that they would not make no noise and shut up. The fat man was scared. He looked excitedly at the sitting guy in front of him. A friend scaredly shouted to the main character that the associated attacker woke up. The offender viciously shouted to school children to unleash him as soon as possible. Pei explained with a smile to the guy that this was only the beginning. The main character told the criminal that they did not want to do anything bad. He demanded that the guy do not harm anyone due to selfishness. The offender angrily looked at the protagonist and explained that his place with friends was not 2 days. The departed people themselves ate and got drunk and then only decided to return. The fat man was amazed. He shouted displeasedly to the guy that, in reality, they went very quickly. The schoolboy told his friends that they were really absent for 2 whole days. The rest of the students nearly died. School children asked their friends in surprise, where were they so long? The surprised fat man could not believe that they were absent for several days. The main character was worried. He began to appear very much guesses. Fan excitedly understood to himself that the case was taking a very unexpected turn. The fat man told his interlocutors that they were mistaken. He added that they did not leave for a long time. The student answered the interlocutors that they all cannot be mistaken. Their friends really have not been for a long time. The guy was worried. He decided to tell his friends absolutely everything that happened to him. The schoolboy gently and very carefully put his hand in front of him. He was worried. The fat man closed his eyes. He was very worried. His hand touched the white fog. The guy scaredly asked his friends if he began to turn into a mummy. Pei looked at his friend and called him a moron in displeasure. The fat man opened his eyes. He realized that his friends did not worry at all next to him. The guy carefully examined his hand. She was normal and everything was fine with him. The fat man was delighted. He shouted to his friends that everything was fine with him. Feng said reasonably that for them, for now, this zone is completely safe. The main character looked at his friend. In the distance, the outlines of the city center were visible in front of them. Feng told his friends thoughtfully that they need to continue to move on now. Pei held out his hand in front of him. He tried to feel the space in front. The guy crouched to the ground. He held a line to the line to designate the territory. The fat man was frightened. He tried to extend his hand in front of him with excitement. Feng was sitting on the ground. He drew linen with a stone. Friends carefully watched him. School children decided to carefully explore the space in front of them. Pei held out his hand forward. The fat man was still worried when he held out his hand forward. She trembled a lot. The main characters helped their friends. He held out his hand in front of him in the fog. The hairdryer was very excited. He carefully looked in front of him when he held his hand. The fat man went to Feng Yan and asked him in a frightened voice to be more careful. Pei told his friends that they had passed only a couple of dozen steps forward in an hour. He explained that everything becomes more dangerous. Feng turned around and looked at his friend. He decided to go forward himself. The main character, with a confident step, began to go forward through the fog. Friends looked very excited after the guy. They called him by name. The main character was surprised. He noticed something in front of him in the fog. Friends became worried. The fat man asked the protagonist what he sees in front of him. The fat man fell silent. He also began to notice the outlines of the building ahead of them. The guy shouted joyfully that they had a supermarket. They were in the city center. The guy excitedly told school children that they scored food and immediately went back the same road. They could not disappear for 2 days. Friends around were very surprised. They stood silently and pondered what they heard. A girlfriend turned to the main character and asked what was happening at all. Pei looked at his friend and asked with interest if he understood. The main character looked at his friend and said that he could only assume one thing. The girl was very scared. She excitedly asked her friend, what did he suggest? Feng told his surprised friends that they were closed not only in space, but also in time. The doctor in the hospital went to the girl lying on the bed. She was unconscious and her eyes were closed. At this time, Van entered the ward, accompanied by his colleague Mi Tao. The doctor joyfully greeted the coming Mr. Van Leon. Van asked the doctor, did he manage to contact? The doctor answered the guy that he could not. Van's eyes lit up. He was unhappy that in 4 days it was not possible to contact. He realized that the girl may not be a portal. The doctor explained to the interlocutor that temporary connection is actually very unstable. Mitao asked the doctor, can they only measure the lying girl and could not fully control her? Van looked at the patient. He said that to create a portal, it is necessary that both countries have powerful general thoughts or memories. It will also be required that the fluctuations in the waves of the brain exceed the fluctuations of an ordinary person. The girl was lying silently. The guy explained that technology cannot solve such a problem. Van said that the protagonist and his mother should have all this the best. Mi Tao asked the interlocutor if there was no one but Van Yan and his mother who could create a portal. Van thought and answered the interlocutor that there is another person for this. The guy said that everything can be more dangerous if the person suitable for them is really suitable. Van Liang told the girl that everything can be much more dangerous. He thought about Pei's guy at this time. The main character told his surprise friends that they were closed not only in space. Fanya was listening with great attention to the surrounding people. Even a tied criminal was alert. The protagonist summed up in important voice that they are also connected in time. The girl incredulously asked the interlocutor, what did he mean? Fan answered his girlfriend that they were stuck, not just in the fog. They also faced the problem of deviation from real time. One of the guys asked with surprise if such a deviation in time to influence their return. School children became worried. They wanted to return home as soon as possible. The guy asked scaredly, would they be able to get out of here? Fan told his friends a soothing voice so that they would not be worried. Suddenly, a loud laughter came from the side. The protagonist glanced excitedly aside. A tied criminal sat and laughed loudly. The school children around looked at him with surprise. The bandit sat and laughed loudly for unknown reasons. There was silence around him. The fat man went to the criminal and shoved him with his hand. He asked, what is so funny? The guy fell silent. He looked aside at the student with a crazy look. The fat man was scared. He ran up and hid behind the protagonist. The bandit viciously told the guys that they are still hoping to return home. He explained that nothing would change even after they found food. The attacker said that the fat man deceives them all. In reality, their friends did not see any supermarket when they were absent. The bandit viciously explained to the interlocutors that they could not get out of this place. A tied guy continued to laugh. To himself, he decided to tell the interlocutors what would happen to them. The attacker viciously told the school children that they would all wait for death together. The students were very scared. They decided that they no longer have the opportunity to escape. At this time, as a criminal came up with Pei with a club and brought her to his face, the schoolboy viciously told the criminal that there are many problems that need to be solved. Pei pointed his bat on the attacker and said that he was a problem. The criminal was scared. He decided that the schoolboy would now hit him back. Pei smiled a little. He decided not to beat the attacker but to turn to friends. The schoolboy told the interlocutors that, because of the accident, they were in such a place without the opportunity to return home. Pei, in an excited voice, told friends that they were all exhausted. The students listened with excitement. They were scared. They were scared. The guy excitedly asked his friends how long can they live in this place. Pei told school children that there should be comrades that you can rely on nearby. The student pointed out a bat and said that even at such times there are people who harm others. Pei angrily said that the attacker took food from his friends and beat his students. A tied attacker also mocked the surrounding girls. Pei told the maliciously connected guy that he crippled their respected teacher Zhang. The student viciously shouted that he did not want him to be such an evil and terrible person to the criminal of punishment next to them. The school children got angry. They shouted together that they would punish the attacker. The criminal asked the student with a frightened voice, what was he going to do? Pei smiled slyly. He decided to think about how he would punish the attacker. The criminal was worried. He looked scared at the student in front of him. The attacker looked at the schoolboy. Pei told angrily to the criminal that he wants to kill him. Students around viciously began to scream so that Pei would beat the criminal and take revenge on their teacher. A tied attacker was frightened. He decided to turn to Pei Zi. The schoolboy viciously looked at the criminal and said that he had caused them pain. Now he must pay for his actions. Pei raised his hand with a bat. He decided to turn to the rest of the students. The guy with a bat in his hands asked his friends, which of them will be the first to hit the criminal? Students became worried. They looked at the bat, but no one wanted to pick her up. Pei was still standing with a bat in his hands and looked at his friends. School children stood on the spot. The student said displeasedly that with the guy drink something wrong. She did not understand why he wanted to beat the criminal. The main character thought he could not definitely retell what his friend would do now. The schoolgirl was worried and she could not believe that the drink would really beat the attacker. Teacher Zhang asked the guy scared, "What are they going to do?" The woman wanted to stop school children. The main character ran behind the teacher and grabbed her hand. Feng told the woman in a calm voice to stop. Zhang answered the main character that she was a teacher and she would stop school children. Feng looked calmly at the teacher and said that she could no longer help. The protagonist explained to the woman that she could not do anything. The attacker viciously asked the student if he had the courage to hit him. The criminal told the guy that he could hit him on the head. After that, no one will threaten them. The student dropped the bat. A tied criminal shouted to the students that they were youngsters. The criminal shouted joyfully to school children around him that they would not dare to kill a person. Pei approached the bat on the ground. He took her in his hands and wanted to give her to a friend. Pei put the bat in the student's hand. He explained that the criminal is already connected and you cannot be afraid. The guy told the student that he should take revenge. He demanded that he recall what happened before. Pei said excitedly to the guy next to him that everyone was looking at him. Pei stood behind the student and wanted to explain to him that all their problems were due to the criminal. The schoolboy told the student who was shot down that all his problems because of the person who is sitting in front of him. The student looked excitedly and silently in front of him. He decided to finish off the criminal. The schoolboy resolutely raised his hands with a bat. He decided to hit her on the head of an attacker. The teacher ran up behind. She shouted to the guy not to do this. Pei was very surprised. He did not understand why the teacher Zhang decided to stop them. The woman asked the guy strictly, "What will happen next after he kills the criminal?" Drink asked the teacher displeasedly, "Do they really need to let go of the scum now?" Zhang suggested that the students be more reliable to tie the criminal and make sure that he could no longer harm. She explained that there is already enough food. Pei decided to tell the woman about what they saw when they left. The student told his friends that their current world is not different from the usual and familiar world. The supermarket is full of food. The guy explained that in the new world, empty and clean restaurants and clean parks. Drink with excitement told your interlocutors that he had never seen around living beings. The guy explained to surprise school children that there were no animals around people and nothing alive. The schoolboy asked with the excitement of his friends, "Do they understand what all this means?" Drink with an evil smile told friends that in this world they can only protect themselves. Drive asked the teacher excitedly, "Does she really want the bastard to be among them and intimidate them?" The student asked the woman, "Did she really want the offender to humiliate them all?" Zhang thought. She was affected by the student's words and she did not know what to answer, the teacher thought. She heard from the side a very strong scream and a blow. The schoolboy swung a bat and hit with all his might a tied criminal. The student looked at the criminal with an evil and insane look after he hit him. The woman looked in surprise at the criminal lying on the ground. The attacker shouted after the blow. People around looked at him in fright. A schoolboy with purple hair looked angrily at a lying criminal. Drink went behind the student and calmly put his hand on his shoulder. Drink said with confidence in the guy's voice that now the attacker will not mock him. The schoolboy felt very weakened. He dropped the bat to the ground. The guy was scared. He knelt down to raise the bat in front of him. Some schoolboy ran up from the side and grabbed the bit. He said that he wants to hit the next. The guy scaredly called his friend named Van Lan. The guy had a wound on his face. He said that he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. A tied criminal told the guy in dismay that he would not hit him. The schoolboy waved a bat in front of him. The offender screamed in fright. Vaughn looked angrily at the tied guy and demanded that he do not scream. The schoolboy viciously told the criminal that there are a lot of people around in order to hit. The attacker was scared. He realized that all students would beat him with a bat. School children approached in turn, and each of them beaten the criminal. Even the girls who were nearby beat a bound attacker. The students stood in line. Someone shouted so that the criminal was not spared. Doctor stood calmly and absolutely without any emotion looked at everything that was happening. The teacher was very worried. She shouted to her students so that they stopped. The girl shouted excitedly to the main character to stop the disciples. The protagonist explained to the girl that fire inside people could warm them and could harm them. The students continued to beat the criminal. Feng said that the flame of the crowd became a monster that burns everything in its path. On the ground lay the bound body of the guy. He was beaten and did not show signs of life. The students stood around the corpse of an attacker. They looked at him silently. Drink handed the bat chief and said that his turn had to beat. The main character answered the interlocutor that he was no longer needed in this state. Drink looked at his friend and said that he was certainly needed. The guy said cunningly to the main character that they would all see how he would hit a dead criminal. The guy looked at his friend and said that they should be united at such an unusual time. He told the main character that he needed his wisdom. Drink held a bloodied bat in his hands. He silently looked at Fanya next to him. An unexpectedly beaten attacker came to his senses. He shouted to people to stop. The criminal told the school children that he would not do anything wrong. The attacker with the last strength was prayed against the guy of Peijie. The schoolboy told the criminal that he would go to another world now. The student swung a bat on his head to finish off a lying guy. The teacher was very scared. She realized that the schoolboy will now achieve an attacker. The student stood next to Pi. They calmly watched how he prepared to hit. The guy, with all his might on a grand scale, hit a tied attacker battered on the head. The offender whispered the name of Peijie before his death. Before his death, the attacker whispered to his interlocutor that he deceived him. A tied criminal before his death said that the guy drink him deceived him. The guy threw the bat to the side. He realized that the criminal was over. Drink took off his window glasses and decided to wipe them with a napkin. The student turned to his friends and said that now they could get out of here. School children stood. They looked at the bound dead guy with a shocked look. The students screamed joyfully. They greeted their friend Peiji. Someone was delighted that finally the attacker died. The schoolboy said that it was good that they were drinking with them. The main character thought. He looked somewhere aside an invisible look. School children were very slowly moving forward in small steps. Van looked very carefully and warily in front of him. He saw a white fog around. The guy was delighted. He said in a quiet voice that they finally achieved something. School children around were surprised and delighted. They noticed something interesting in front of them. The girl said in an excited voice that the main character was right. They found something. School children saw a huge city with high-rise buildings in front of them. The students began to joyfully run along the street. Some of them said that they will not starve at last. Drink warned your friends that there was no need to go into the fog. This is the only way they will be safe. The guy said joyfully to his friends that now they could have fun. Fan asked his friend if he was afraid that anything else could happen. Drink told your friends that they should relax a bit after a long stay in a depressed state. The students ran into the store. They began to massively type goods from the shelves. The schoolboy took a pack of chips and opened it. He looked at food with appetite. The guy told himself very joyfully that the chips were delicious. Van examined the high wardrobes with food. He said that they would not eat so much in a month. The schoolboy went to the girlfriend and handed her favorite treat in her hands. The girl swung her hand and knocked out a package of food from her friend's hands. A girlfriend displeasedly told the guy that thanks to this case, she realized what kind of person he was. The girl looked aside and said that the hero in their class is Peijie. The girl said joyfully to the guy that he saved them all. Another student approached the side of the side. The main character looked at his friend. Someone said that drink deserves to be the first on the course. The girlfriend asked Fanya, why did he behave so detached? The main character was silent. He carefully examined the interior of the supermarket in front of him. Suddenly, the guy noticed something very important. His gaze was alert. Fan asked excited friends to get their phones as soon as possible. The schoolgirl told a friend that there was no mobile network around. Fan told the girl to get the phone as soon as possible. The students looked at each other among themselves. They decided to get the phones and look at them. School children were surprised to notice how, in their smartphones, there was a different time and date. The main character told his friends that everything is really as they thought. Fan explained to the girls that they did not just feel a time displacement, but it really differs. The girlfriend looked at the protagonist and said that she did not know what it might mean. Fan thoughtfully told the girl with the phone that he was still in doubt. The main character explained to his interlocutors that they are in some other city. The girlfriend was worried. She asked the protagonist with interest, "What does this mean?" At this time, there was a sound of opening a bottle of wine. Someone decided to uncorn the drink. One of the students very slowly from the bottle poured into the wine into a glass. Drink sat in a chair and slowly drank wine from a glass. He liked the taste. The guy told his friends that the wine from the bottle seemed very good to him. Drink looked at his friend through a glass. Red wine splashed inside. Fan turned to the side. He looked displeased at his friend with a glass. Drink tilted the glass to the side. He asked the protagonist if he could make a choice. At this time, a loud scream rang out on the side. School children excitedly turned to the side. The fat man lay on the floor. Under it there were a lot of food in packages. Some student put his leg on his back. School children watched in surprise how one guy beat a fat man lying on the floor. The student looked aside and said that one guy was beaten by fat. The schoolboy displeasedly and viciously told the fat man that he only knows what is. The fat guy was scaredly lying on the floor and shouted an apology. The student swung his fist and shouted to the fat man to give him all the food. Suddenly, the main character came up from the side. He grabbed the guy's hand with his hand and did not let him hit him. The angry schoolboy was surprised. He looked displeased to the side to see who prevented him from. Fan looked strictly and displeased at his friend. He still held his hand. The main character pulled abruptly and turned his friend's hand to the side. Feng abruptly pulled the student by the hand and threw him in a big way into the wardrobe with food. The guy was very unhappy. He asked the protagonist, "What does he do?" Fan asked strictly with the student, "What was he about to do?" Other school children stood nearby. The guy said that the fat man took his tinning can. He immediately demanded that the student return his food. The girl strictly asked his friend, why did he decide that the bank with food belongs to him? Other people could take canned food. The guy shouted displeasedly that if he was the first to look at the bank, it means that she belonged to him. The girl was very angry. The main character reassured his girlfriend. Fan looked carefully in front of him. The surprised student stood behind him. School children stood and looked in amazement at the protagonist. They waited for him to say. Fan asked strictly from friends, did they really decide that they were already safe? The main character told friends that, while the city is shrouded in fog, they have no connection with other people. Danger may appear at any time. Fan asked strictly from a friend, did he really decide to quarrel in such a difficult situation? The guy cheerfully asked the protagonist, what else could happen to them? One of the students confirmed to his friends that Fan Yan was completely right. Drink told friends that the more they will be in this place, the more closely they should be. The guy explained that there are a lot of supplies in this place. He explained that all food needs to be rationally and moderately distributed. The main character turned to the side. He looked at his friend with interest. The girl came up and crouched to raise a bottle from the floor. She said that she agreed with the opinion of the guy Pei. School children were very surprised. He noticed his girlfriend Shen Yue in front of him. Schoolgirls stood and looked in surprise at their familiar Shen. A girl with blue hair was angry. She wanted to say something. The schoolgirl said in a dissatisfied voice that their girlfriend Shen used to pretend to be half dead. The student explained that in such times a real personality of a person is manifested. Shen explained that any team should have a core and a leading team. This will help so that everything does not turn into chaos. The schoolgirl slyly said that after the last crisis, everyone noticed the abilities of their classmate. Shen pointed her finger to the side and said that their core could be a guy drink jai. The student was delighted due to the fact that he was noticed. He straightened his glasses. One of the students shouted joyfully that Pei Jai is best suited for such purposes. With his words, a girlfriend agreed. Shin, in a calm voice, told the students that there is another person who deserves this. The guy showed his finger displeasedly and asked why he should listen to Pei. The protagonist asked strictly from the student, why did he decide that he could take canned food and why he did not give her schoolchildren liang and the student got angry. He did not know what to answer the main character to his accusations. The guy turned to the side and began to leave. Schoolchildren escorted his eyes. Drink stood silently behind the protagonist. Each of them was thinking about something of his own. The guy Drink was glad that he was noticed. He was able to stand out among schoolchildren. Schoolchildren walked around the deserted city. Around there were high-rise buildings. The girls walked and examined the windows with fashionable clothes. They wanted to choose outfits. The girl shouted in surprise that she first touched Gucci's fashionable handbag. Girlfriends examined the student of Shen. One of them said that she was very suitable for her set of clothes. The girl Lo Si told her girlfriend that it would be very bad if others find out that she took her clothes from the store. One of the schoolgirls turned displeasedly to her girlfriend. She did not like her remark. The schoolgirl asked the girl, is she really seeing someone else here? Another student said that if she was afraid of something, then she could not take things here. Shen said with a smile that such a beauty as La Si should not be fashionable to dress up to be beautiful. Shen told her girlfriend that in her place, she would like to be in front of her beloved guy in the most beautiful form. Lo excited after she heard such words. She looked in front of her. Lo stood and fascinated looked at the window. She saw expensive outfits there. A girlfriend came up behind. She excitedly called the girl a girl. She still stood and was silent. School children went to the computer hall. They were very happy. Someone said that for them it is now like a private party. The guy grabbed the mouse in his hands. He said that you can turn on and play. On the side, someone called the guy Pei Jai. He did not answer and looked in front of him. The schoolboy turned to a friend and invited him to play. He added that they lack a person. Drive did not answer your friend. He stood and looked somewhere to the side. The guy turned around and smiled at his friends. He said they could play themselves. The main character stood on the balcony. He looked from a height at a huge and deserted city. Drink unexpectedly went to the side. He told the main character that their friends were naive. Fan returned back and noticed his friend. The guy stood with a glass of wine in his hand. The main character answered his friend that he would not drink alcohol with him. Drive smiled slyly to yourself. He needed to talk about something with his friend. The guy put the glass on the table. He asked his friend if he was aware of everything deep down. Drink explained with a smile to his interlocutor that their friend still did not understand what happened. The guy remembered his girlfriends. He explained that they have a lack of knowledge about possible risks. Drink remembered the guys at the computers. He explained that in the disasters that they experience, one can notice hidden benefit. The guy joyfully said that they all remain to live in an empty city. He asked with interest what this might mean. Drink said calmly to the chief hero that he should understand everything perfectly. The guy with glasses looked very joyfully from the balcony down to the big city. The guy held out his hand forward. It was as if he wanted to reach an invisible interlocutor from the balcony. Drink held a hand in front of him over the city. He looked down somewhere. The main character silently looked at his friend. He did not understand what he was doing. Drink turned his head to the side. He looked at his friend with pleasure. Fan answered his friend with displeasure that he was not interested in talking about it. The main character turned around and went silently to the exit from the roof. His friend remained standing still. Fan went to the door and closed it behind him. His friend remained standing on the roof. Drink with irritation in your hand squeezed your glass of wine. The glass scattered. The guy looked at his wounded hand. He called the departed protagonist by name. School children gathered to relax together and live in the building of a large hotel. The guy, lying in bed, joyfully said that he likes to live in a 5-star hotel. Shen took a bath in her room. In her water, she swam rose petals. Ling slept deeply. Through a dream, he saw food. The guy told himself that crayfish for him is very tasty. A girl with blue hair was lying on the bed and silently looked aside. The schoolgirl looked sadly at the pillow in front of her. She called by the name of the girl Lo Si. The store was empty. The main character decided to go there personally and check everything. Fan extended his hand to the metal flashlight lying on the floor. The protagonist turned on the flashlight and lit everything around. He looked closely. Fan went to his backpack. He decided to hide the flashlight there. The main character noticed something suspicious on the street. He turned around. Fan looked very carefully through the glass into the street. He was excited. The main character noticed how his girlfriend was walking along the street. She was herself. The guy noticed that Lu approached the window and peered very carefully at her. The girl with great excitement examined the mannequin with expensive branded clothes. Lo came close to the mannequin. She really wanted to try on an expensive outfit. The girl stood and looked at the mannequin. She still could not decide to take off her clothes from him. Lo remembered the words of her girlfriend. The schoolgirl told her that in her place she would show the guy her best version. The student stood and looked carefully in front of her. She thought. Lo held out her hand to the mannequin and touched him. She wanted to take off her clothes. The main character is then a girlfriend by name. She was scared at the last moment. Lo turned around and with fright noticed a schoolboy. The main character asked the girl what she was doing here at such a late hour. The girlfriend came to her senses. She said that she decided to take a walk because she could not fall asleep. The girl asked the protagonist what he was doing in this place with a backpack. Fan told his girlfriend that he was just collecting the most necessary here. He warned the interlocutor so that she would not go alone. Lo said joyfully to her friend that he is always calm and reliable. The girl wanted to tell a friend that, if not for him, then she could continue. Lo came close to the main character. She wanted to ask him something. The girlfriend asked the guy, is he going to protect her all the time? The main character was surprised. He did not expect such a question from the interlocutor. The girl looked excitedly at her friend and wanted to say something to him. Fan suddenly closed the girl's mouth with his hand. It was unexpected for her. The main character told his girlfriend to behave quietly. He listened carefully. Fan removed his hand on the girl's face. She was excited and scared. Lo asked the protagonist with an excited voice, "What happened?" The main character told the girl that there is someone outside. He asked her to come closer to him. The main character stood with his girlfriend. They noticed how someone unfamiliar ran down the street. Lo and Fan are worried. They could not understand who could be on the street. The main character looked closely and noticed that the stranger left the supermarket. Fan noted to himself that there was no rain, but on the street the man was in a cloak. Fan stood with his girlfriend. They looked with great excitement at the store through the window. The main character felt a suspicious smell. A girlfriend asked the guy, "What happened?" The protagonist very excitedly realized to himself that something was going wrong. Inside the store appeared flames. Stranger arson of the room. The main character stood with a girlfriend with fright looked at the raging flame. Fan shouted to the girl and asked her to bring someone with her. The guy began to look for a fire extinguisher. He remembered that the fire extinguisher was somewhere nearby. The main character looked aside and noticed that the fire extinguisher disappeared somewhere. Fan remembered himself excitedly that he had seen a fire extinguisher in this place during the day. The main character turned around and ran to the exit. He wanted to run into the utility room. Fan noticed a water crane in the utility room. He decided to start extinguishing a fire. The protagonist looked at the bucket near the tap. He realized that he could put out the fire. Students in the hotel got a lot. Someone shouted that the supermarket was on. School children scaredly ran along the floor. Someone shouted so that everyone wake up as the supermarket was on. Frightened students extinguished the fire. Someone excitedly shouted that the fire was very large. The guy with the buckets told friends that you need to get water in a public toilet. School children handed each other buckets with water. They tried to put out a fire as soon as possible. The girl with a scale poured water from a bucket to a burning place in the market. The main character extinguished the fire on an equal basis and together with everyone. He poured water in a scale. The fire burned very brightly and continued to spread. School children could not put him out. The students were excited. They did not know what to do. The flame only flared up. The main character stood with his friends. They looked excitedly at the fire. Fan was worried. He realized that he and his friends would not be able to quickly extinguish the flame. The main character did not understand why the fire sensor in the store did not work. The main character looked with excitement at his friends. School children wore water. The guy came up with an original idea. He shouted to his friends to immediately close the doors. Some of the students asked why close the door. The guy shouted displeasedly that they could be suffocated. Drink shouted to his friends to do everything as the main character said. The girl scaredly ran to the door and pressed the button to close it. The door closed. The room in the supermarket was covered with black smoke. School children felt suffocation. They coughed. Caustic smoke spread everywhere. Someone asked the protagonist with a weakening voice, "Is everything according to plan?" Fan squeezed his hands into a fist with excitement. He expected that a fire alarm would work. The main character felt that he was suffocating. He put his hand to his mouth. The fire protection sensor worked. Water began to pour on the room. The main character with friends watched how the water gradually began to extinguish the fire. The fire in the room was getting less and less. School children ran out of the store. One guy shouted in fright that he had almost suffocated because of the fire. Drink said in a calm voice to your friends that they need to count the losses. The main character, along with friends, examined the burned supermarket inside. Fan turned to the side. He looked at the burned products on the shelf. Fan crouched and looked carefully at the burned bottles near the closet. The main character looked up. He realized that fire destroyed many food supplies. Fan examined the shelves and burned food on them. He thought about his own. Lan said, in a very excited voice, that a lot of food was destroyed. The schoolboy was very scared. He shouted displeased that everything was fine during the day, and then there was a big fire. Fan calmly answered his friends that there was nothing to be surprised. He explained that someone specially organized arson. The main character carefully looked at his interlocutors. He wanted to say something important. Fan told his friends in a strict voice that one of them organized arson. The main character told his friends that one of them specially organized arson. Fan explained to school children that the arsonist is one of them. The students said excitedly that the food belongs to them to all. The destruction of supplies would not benefit any of them. School children talked among themselves. They could not understand who could arrange a fire. Fan explained to his friends that the arsonist left evidence at the crime scene. The main character Chagall on the floor of the supermarket. Around there were traces of combustion. Fan explained to friends that cologne does not apply to food. He appeared in bottles around the fire site. This was the reason for the fire. The protagonist said that the culprit raised cologne in the store. Immediately after this, the arsonist immediately ran back to the hotel. The main character explained that the attacker was mixed with a crowd who came running to extinguish the fire. The protagonist looked at his friends with excitement. He said that everything happened somehow. The schoolboy said that the arsonist is the one who is very, very smoked by cologne. Fan sat down on the floor and extended his hand to the lying charred bottle. The guy sniffed. He said that he was sorry for something because of something. Fan explained to his friends that cologne easily evaporates at high temperatures. Due to thick smoke from the fire, his smell precisely disappeared. The main character thought. He wanted to tell his friend something important. Liang was worried. He shouted to his friend that he completely agreed with him. The fat man with a braided voice told the main character that he now remembered everything. Lian pointed his finger at the guy nearby and said that he was to blame for everything. The fat man explained that he felt a strong smell of cologne from the schoolboy after he entered the room. The guy angrily answered the fat man that he unfairly accused him. Drink came up behind the student and said that he needed to teach him how to do it properly. The guy Drink said with a smile to his friend that he also smelled the smell of cologne. The schoolboy got angry. He did not know what to answer by Tsi to his accusation. The guy stood surrounded by school children. He did not know what to tell them. Suddenly, the schoolboy decided to escape. He shouted to the disciples to get out of his path. The students chased after their friend. They did not want to give him the opportunity to escape. Van rushed for a schoolboy at all speed. He decided to catch up with him as soon as possible. As a result, Van ran up behind the student and grabbed his clothes with his hand. The fugitive fell to the ground. Another student stood behind him and held him. School children fled to Van. They were glad that the guy was able to detain the attacker. One of the students asked why the schoolboy staged a fire in the store. The main character explained that the student felt awkward and anger after a case. Drink said in a reasonable voice that all this is very vile. The guy was sitting on the ground and was scared. The schoolboy was unhappy. He shouted to his friends that the protagonist certainly had no good intentions. The student turned and said that he knew about the secret plans of Fan Yan. The students thought. They realized that the fire was discovered by the protagonist with a girlfriend, Lo Si. School children could not understand why the guy and the girl were at the scene of the incident at a later time. The students looked at the girl Lo Si and decided that all this was very strange. The guy explained that when he went to the place, he saw the main character's backpack on the counter. The student explained that Fan decided in the store to pick up something valuable for himself. The school children thought. They looked at the protagonist silently and began to suspect something. The schoolboy ran inside the store. He shouted that he would bring the main character's backpack. The guy brought a backpack and opened it. Everyone looked there with surprise. Inside the backpack lay foods and a flashlight. School children looked at it with interest. The students could not understand why the main character put such things into a backpack. Lo Si looked in surprise at things in a backpack. She did not suspect that the main character had gathered them. Friends asked Fan Yan, what was he going to do with all those things in the backpack, and why did they need him? The girl looked displeased at the protagonist. The guy was silent in response. Friends stood and looked inquiringly at the protagonist. He did not tell them anything. The guy on the ground laughed. Friends turned out with surprise and excitement and looked at him. The student viciously told his friends that the main character really conceived something against them. Van came up and put his hand on the shoulder for the student. He said that he would calm down. Pei turned to the main character. He wanted to demand an explanation. Drink asked Fanya to clearly explain to him everything that happened. The main character was silent. The school children stood silently around him and waited for him to answer them. The girl with great excitement asked Fanya, what did he think of this? The main character closed his eyes. He realized that he would now need to say something to his friends. Fan Yan calmly explained to his interlocutors that he was leaving, and that's all. The schoolgirl was very surprised and amazed. She did not understand how a guy could take and leave. Drive silently looked at the protagonist. He realized that he decided to completely leave. Drink went to his friend and said that they could solve all his problems together. Fan looked with a smile at his friend and said that all this was not necessarily. The main character extended his hand to the backpack. He said that he himself would figure it out. At this time, one schoolgirl ran to the guy and said he waited. Shen asked the protagonist displeasedly. Did he really decide to leave when he wanted? The girl explained to the guy that they had just lost a lot of products. Now he wants to leave and take part of the remaining food. Fan did not pay attention to the words of his girlfriend. He headed to the side. Shen silently and with a very displeased gaze escorted her friend. The girlfriend said in displeasure after the guy that she considered him to be suspicious from the very beginning. Shen said that the main character is always completely calm, as if it has nothing to do with him. The girl told the guy that he seemed to know in advance that all this would happen. The student looked displeased after the main character. He realized that the girl's accusations were correct. The students stood together and looked after the fan leaving into the distance. The schoolgirl shouted to the girl, Shen, that she did not understand anything in this life. She added that the main character helped them get out of a thick fog. Lion excitedly explained that the main character found evidence and revealed the arsonist. Shen said displeasedly that it is clear why the guy drove a supermarket. Shen turned to school children and said that it was not entirely right to choose someone's side in the group. Drink shouted displeasedly and viciously to the girl to stop. Shen looked displeased at her friend. She was silent and thought what to do. Drink looked aside at the protagonist. He realized that he decided to leave. Shen looked displeased aside. She realized that the main character would leave them. Drink in a serious voice told the main character that he made a decision. Fan answered the interlocutor that he had no other plan from the very beginning. Drink agreed with the response of his friend. He did not tell him anything else. The schoolboy told friends that many of them have their own ideas. He explained that he had already discussed this problem with Fan Yan. The protagonist at goodbye looked at his friend before leaving. Drink told your friends that they are still safe. Someone else should explore the environment. The guy told friends that he would respect their choice. They can stay or leave. Pai pointed to the side of the arsonist sitting on the ground. He warned his friends so that none of them would undermine collective interests like this guy. The schoolboy sternly told his friends that he would not tolerate this from them. Friends with excitement looked at the P. They did not understand what to do next. Suddenly, one girl shouted that she would go with the main character. The rest of the students turned away. Schoolchildren noticed that their girlfriend Xiaofei wanted to leave with Fan Yanam. The girl said to her friends confident that she would go with the main character. The girlfriend explained to Fan Jan that he was very dangerous to hit the road alone. The schoolgirl explained to the guy that they will be able to take care of each other if they go together. Li Si, with great surprise, looked at his girlfriend. Her words made a strong impression on her. Lo Si carefully looked at the schoolgirl Xiaofei and decided that she made the right decision. The girl thought. She decided to herself that she also did not want to leave her friend herself. Lo Si was in deep thought. She realized that she needed to make an important decision. The girl shouted with confidence in her voice to the main character that she would go with him too. Fan told his friends that he could not guarantee their safety. The protagonist explained to the girls that it was better for them to stay with the rest of the school children. Lo Si looked at the protagonist with excitement and she still wanted to go with him. Shin called her girlfriend a cowardly girl with an evil smile. Xiaofei, in a confident voice, told her friends so that they would not even try to convince her. The schoolgirl confidently told the interlocutors that she would never change his mind. The fat man was scared. He thought and realized that he was better not to remain alone. Liao decided to himself that he needed to go with the main character together. If he remains, then the rest of the students can rot him. The fat man was scared. Он понял, что он должен сейчас пойти вместе с Фанем. Парень испуганно поднял руку вверх. He called his friend in a timid voice. The fat man announced to his friends that he also wanted to go with Fan Yan. The school children angrily said that if the fat man leaves, then he would no longer eat their food. Lion stood silently in front of the main character and looked at him. Girls stood nearby. Drink from the side looked at the students. He realized that someone else would want to go with the main character. Drink turned around and asked the school children, "Are there still those who wanted to go with the main character?" Another volunteer appeared. He raised his hand and said that he would go too. The guy in glasses said that he has one condition. Everyone who wants to leave must take water and food reserves for 2 days. School children were very surprised. They were very unhappy that their friend wanted to take food and food for 2 days. The guy in glasses decided to explain to his friends why he wants to take so many products with him. The schoolboy told friends that if they find more resources, they will return and inform. Drink looked at his friend and said that they had agreed then. The teacher Jang ran up. She scaredly asked school children how the supermarket could light up late at night. The woman scaredly asked the girl, was she injured? Drink said a surprised teacher that everything is fine and he was leading her on the course of business. The student was surprised. He remembered that the hotel was very noisy, but for some reason the teacher did not hear anything. After a long story, Zhang answered the student that she understood him. The teacher asked the protagonist, is he sure of this? Zhang looked at the protagonist and said that she also did not know what to do. The teacher said in a reasonable voice that she simply realized the situation. Fan explained to the woman that in special circumstances it is better to have a leader. The woman told the main character that they were only settled, and he was already leaving somewhere. Jang shouted to the guy with a frightened voice that she also wants to go with him. The main character explained to the teacher that there are still students who remain. The remaining school children will need more attention. The woman realized that she would have to stay with her students. Fawn explained to the interlocutors that they would return to the hotel. Then they will collect all things and leave. In the morning, a blue fog hung over the city, and the main character prepared to leave. Fan stood with his girlfriends. Opposite him was a drink. The schoolboy smiled at the main character and wished him good luck in the investigation. Fenya turned to friends and said that they were ready to leave. Next to him was his friends and girlfriends. Fan Chagall along the street with his companions. Following him, silently watched the school children. Shin asked his friend, will their plan work? Drink was silent in response. At this time, the guy Van ran up on the side and called to him excitedly, Page I. Van held a tied guy. He asked what to do with him. Drink a long and silent look at the guy connected in front of him. The guy was scared. He realized that his friends could finish him now. The student had some kind of plan. He realized that they would have to punish the arsonist. Drink told your friends that a guy needs to give a little fire if he loves him so much. Fan Show with his friends walked around the city. Around there was an unsightly fog. The guy asked the protagonist displeasedly, where are they going now? Fan, without turning around, told his school children that they were going to the east of the city. The girls walked and revised among themselves. They were silent. Xiao felt that she was getting tired. Xiao told the main character that they had been walking for a very long time. She invited him to rest. The main character explained to his interlocutors that they walked only 3 hours. Fan saw nearby tables for a cafe. He invited the girls to sit there a little. The main character asked his girlfriend, was she hungry? She said in a frightened voice that I needed to have a bite. They do not know what will happen next. A sports girl came up. She asked the interlocutors, could she sit here? She excitedly called her interlocutor the captain and said that she could certainly sit down. The athlete told her interlocutors that they can now call her just Chen Yu. Xiao told her girlfriend Lo Si that she could now try to talk with the captain. At this time, someone from the side watched the girls. He noted to himself a short hairstyle of Xiao Fei. The guy looked at the tender face of the girl Lo Si and the perfect figure of Captain Chin Yu. The student photographed his girlfriends through the apparatus. He was very delighted. The guy joyfully shouted to his friends that he went with them in vain. Lion was surprised to his friend Li Jiam that he still photographs even in such a situation. The guy explained that only in such an environment you can remove an impressive portrait. He decided that he would post photos in his blog when he returned. Li was so noticed that he even presented joyful comments on his photographs from fans. Lion looked at his friend. He felt that he was disgusting to Goosebumps. The main character was resting at the table. To calm down, he drank water from the bottle. Fan put the bottle on the table. In front of him lay a small piece of food. The main character was silent. He was very immersed in deep thought. A schoolboy came up behind and asked the protagonist, "What is he doing?" The student looked at the table and told the guy with interest that he was busy with the decomposition of food. Fan asked his friend named Chen Juo what kind of thoughts he had about this. Chen put a backpack. After he saw what happened to their teacher, he secretly conducted similar experiments. The guy explained to the main character that they could not limit the variable when time has no standard. Therefore, you cannot get a reliable result. Fan silently listened to the story of his friend. He did not answer him. Chen said with interest in the main character that he had discovered something in the fog. The guy put a small and portable electronic thermometer on the table. The main character said his opinion that he sees a compact air detector in front of him. A friend answered Fanya that he was really very good. Chen explained to his interlocutor that the various solid particles are called smog, which exceed the permissible limits in the atmosphere. The guy explained that the fog, which is around them in the city, has a special reason. The main character looked at the sensor in front of him. He noticed that the indicator of air pollution all the time is normal. Fanya had some guesses. He realized that the fog around them is some kind of unusual. Chen held out his hand forward and took the sensor to hide it. The guy explained to the main character that if he was at the institute, he could analyze the components of the fog. The main character asked his friend, why did he decide to go with them? Chen suspiciously asked the interlocutor, why did he want to go to the east of the city? The main character thought. He did not know how to explain everything to his interlocutor. Fan seriously told the guy that he should now check something. At this time, agents of Van and Mitao were in the office. They were in a high building. The guy sat and threw his legs on the table. He looked at the monitors with a bored look. Van read various news. There were reports about incidents in the city supermarket. The girl went to her colleague. She wanted to report something to him. The guy, without getting up, asked the interlocutor, "How are things going now?" Me answered the agent that there was absolutely nothing new. The girl said that there is no progress about the patient. Van was very concentrated to clean the banana in his hands. He told the girl that she would not be worried, and they have a lot of time. Mitao said excitedly to the interlocutor that they have no other way to find out what is happening on the other side without doors. Van said that when the initial fear of the stranger subsides, then you need to start acting immediately. The guy cunningly told the girl that you can guess what their goals are doing for what they left. Mitao excitedly asked his colleague if he was not afraid that their goals would move faster than they expected. Van reassured the interlocutor. He explained that when time loses the standard, there is no more concept quickly or slowly. The guy sat and carefully looked at the monitors on the wall around him. Suddenly, the agent was worried. He heard the phone ring in his pocket. Van put in his hand in his pocket and grabbed the apparatus. He answered the interlocutor. The agent in a calm voice asked on the phone, "What happened?" The guy answered the interlocutor that he understood him. Images on the monitors did not change in any way. Mitao asked the guy with great excitement, "Who called him? And what happened?" Van abruptly jumped to his feet and prepared to leave. He did not answer. The girl asked the young master to explain everything to her. The guy said with great excitement to the girl that something was discovered. Van explained to his interlocutor before leaving to find a new corpse. The main character along with his friend walked around the city. Around everything was abandoned. Lion looked around displeasedly. He said that he was uncomfortable because of a strong wind. Fan inspected the card. He told his companions that they were walking along a short road. The main character looked at the map. He realized that according to their plan, they could from time to time pass by a supermarket or mini-market. The guy thought. He realized that food for them would not be a problem for him, had other fears. Fan Chigal accompanied by his companions. All of them were silent. The main character of the show is ahead. A fat man was playing behind him. Lee walked with the camera and photographed girls. The guy with the camera was very pleased. He already imagined how everyone would comment on his photographs when he would put them on the network. The schoolboy said joyfully to himself that he will become popular. At this time, something flashed in the lane. The guy was scared and became worried. He looked with excitement with the camera to the side. Was he scaredly asked who was in the lane? In response, there was a silence. A friend came up and asked the student, "What happened?" Lee answered the guy that he had a passing figure. The student replied that he had not seen anyone except people from their class. Someone told the photographer that he had already taken so many pictures that he caught hallucinations. Lee was still very scared. He was sure that he noticed something in the lane. The schoolboy told friends to go forward. He personally goes into the lane and check everything. A friend of parting told the photographer that he is a paranoid. Lee sent the camera to the lane and took a few pictures. He decided to move on. The guy himself walked along the lane. He saw garbage and devastation around him. The photographer scaredly noticed that the fog around him was getting thicker and thicker. The guy was very frightened. He walked with slow steps and listened. There was complete silence in the alley. The student reduced a step and prepared to stop. The guy remembered that before his death, the teacher spoke about the fog. Lee held out his hand in front of him. He reminded himself that the fog is very dangerous. The guy looked at his hand. He decided that he had thought of all the problems for himself. Suddenly, the student was worried. He felt some familiar smell. The guy saw in front of him bloody traces on the ground and on the wall. He was worried. The schoolboy could not understand where the blood could come from here in such a place. Lee stood with his camera. He looked at the wall as bewitched. The guy could not understand where the blood could come from. Besides school children, there should be no one here. The schoolboy looked around very excitedly. He thought he could still see something important. Lee noticed something on earth in front of him. He took a closer look. The guy saw a bloodied camera lay in front of him, exactly the same as in his hands. The schoolboy was very amazed. He looked at the bloodied apparatus on the ground. The guy was amazed. He could not understand where this thing with blood could come from. Lee decided to pick up the camera in his own hands. He went to him. Suddenly, a cry came from the side. The schoolboy was very scared. The guy with excitement realized to himself that there may be someone else next to him. Lee carefully looked around. He decided to find a place to hide. The schoolboy was sitting near the wall. He heard some kind of noise from the fog on the side. Some stranger nearby angrily asked someone what he needed. The voices were approaching. Some man called his friend crazy. There was a loud cry. Lee sat near the wall and covered himself with a small wooden cabinet. A piercing scream repeated from the side. The schoolboy was even more scared. There were someone's steps. Several strangers fled along the lane. The student was frightened that strangers were going to him. He decided that he needed to be even quieter. Young guys ran along the lane. They did not know that someone else was there. Lee completely froze. He sat silently and waited for strangers to run past him. The guy even held his breath so as not to make no sound at all. Strangers ran past. They did not notice how someone was sitting near the wall. The schoolboy waited for the steps of strangers subsided. He looked around the corner. Lee calmed down and came to his senses. He realized that strangers finally left. The guy to himself excitedly thought that he accidentally pressed the button in his device. The guy was surprised. He noticed that how an image appeared in his device. Lee noticed two running guys in the picture. These were young school children with backpacks. The guy was surprised. He could not understand how this could happen that these two people were in his picture. The schoolboy was worried. He remembered how very close to him on the ground lay a camera. The student left the alley. He carefully looked around and was looking for a camera. The guy held out his hand to take the camera in his hands and carefully examine it. Lee looked at a bloodied camera with great excitement. His hands trembled. The guy was surprised to notice how in someone else's camera there was the same picture as he had. The protagonist at that time was another part of the city. Someone said that there would be a store in front of them. One of the school children said that the guy drank himself with delicious food in the store. He conveyed only unappetizing food to his friends. Xiu turned around and asked the guy Fu Luna, when did their friend go? The schoolboy said joyfully that he heard something on the way and said that he wants to see what was there. The main character strictly asked friends, how did they allow the student to move away to one? He recalled that it was dangerous in the fog. The student answered displeasedly that they could not do anything. Lee himself wanted to leave. The guy told his interlocutors to wait for them in the store. He promised that they would find and return back. The guy grabbed his friend's hand and said he would walk with him. Did I ask the protagonist with the main character? Will everything be fine with their friends? Fan answered the interlocutor that he did not quite understand how the fog works. Suddenly, school children heard a loud cry. They turned scaredly. Someone fled towards the group of students. The steps of several guys were heard. The main character with friends noticed how their frightened school friends flee to them. The main character, together with friends, became and scaredly looked at school children. Lion asked his friends with a trembling voice, were they just walking after them? The guys were very scared. They did not even know what to answer to their friends. The main character was very worried. He noticed that there were traces of blood on one of the school children. Shio looked at her friends with great excitement. The guys showed anxiety. The girl, scared, shouted that those who came to school children want to escape now. Chin abruptly ran to one of the guys and grabbed his hand by the clothes. The captain demanded strictly with the guy to tell her what happened. She asked why blood on him. The student was very scared. He tried to squeeze out his words, but he did not succeed. The guy crouched and wrapped his arms around his hands. He scaredly told someone that they did not want. The protagonist looked with great surprise at his friends. Chen stood next to him. Fan decided to calm school children. He came up and said that they would not panic. The main character asked the students what happened to them. The guy in front of him could not say anything. The schoolboy grabbed his friend and asked viciously, did he really want to know what happened? The guy angrily looked at his excited friends and replied that he would not tell them anything. The student scaredly explained to his friends that he could not tell them anything. Chin viciously shook her friend for clothes. She recalled that he had traces of blood. Chen went behind the girl and asked her to calm down. The captain relaxed. She looked aside and decided to let her friend go. Chen did not hold the schoolboy by the clothes. She decided to give him the opportunity to tell everything. Chen sharply and displeasedly shoved the schoolboy in front of her with her hand. The student fell to his knees. He explained in a broken voice that he did not want to do this. The guy looked around his friends with a frightened look and decided to tell them everything. Two school children walked along the lane. Around there was complete silence. They were looking for their friend. The guy peered into the deserted lane. He specified whether his friend had been here. The students went on. Everything around was covered with impenetrable fog. The guy said thoughtfully that the fog before was thicker for him. The schoolboy suddenly felt a very suspicious smell. He decided that it was blood. The guy looked around and said that he was terrible. He did not understand why they had to look for a friend. Suddenly, the schoolboy saw something terrible next to him. He screamed loudly. A surprised student noticed how his friend Li Jiao stood next to him with a camera. The guy with excitement told his friend that he was really here. He asked the interlocutor, why didn't he catch up with them? Li, in a frightened and very weak voice, told his friends that they were them. The schoolboy looked scared at his friend and realized that he was completely out of himself. The student held out his hand towards Li. He decided that the guy inhaled a lot of fog. The schoolboy extended his hand to his friend. He said that he should be brought to life. Li suddenly screamed angrily and swung a knife. He almost struck his friend. The guy very scaredly asked his interlocutor, what did he do? The schoolboy with a knife angrily asked the guy, did he really want to kill him? Was he angrily asked his friend with a burning look? Did he really decide to kill him? Lee, with a knife in his hand, began to move towards his friend. He was scared. The schoolboy was scared. He began to gradually back and rested against the wall. The guys were scared. They realized that their friend was completely not in himself and became dangerous. Lee, in an inadequate state, swung his knife to hit one of the school children. The student extended his hand forward and managed to grab the student's hand with a knife. The guy with all his might held the opponent's hand to protect himself from a knife. Suddenly, the student broke the belt on which his camera hung. The camera fell to the ground. The schoolboy did not have time to hold him in his hands. The guy, for a moment, distracted attention. He looked down at his camera. Lee looked at the guy opposite him. He decided to continue to attack him with a knife. The schoolboy jerked very sharply and held out his friend's hand with a knife. The student turned his hand and hit the guy with his own knife in his stomach. From a strong blow, the student sprayed blood from the body. He did not expect this. The student was scared from the side. He looked at a sticking knife from his friend's shock. Lee held out his finger forward. He wanted to accuse the schoolboy opposite him with a dying voice. The guy, with his finger and trembling hand in fright, pointed to his friend. The schoolboy scaredly shouted to a friend that he did not want to hit him with a knife. Lee could no longer stand on his feet. With a dying cry, he fell to the ground. Mi Tao stood in the lane and looked with great horror at the corpse in front of her on the ground. The girl was amazed. She saw in front of her an unrealistically disfigured corpse. The guy's body was distorted to recognition. He seemed to be assembled from fragments of several bodies of people. The corpse looked as if the guy was collected several times from several of his copies in one body. The girl felt that she was bad. She decided to step aside so as not to see the corpse. Van said with a smile to his colleague so that she would go aside to the garbage bucket. He held a slice of melon in his hands. Mitao felt strong nausea. She decided to step aside. Van sat down on the ground in front of his body. He carefully examined him. Around there were a puddle of blood. Mitao ran to the side to the garbage bucket, and she was very sick. Van pushed the melon with appetite. He looked at the abnormal body on the ground in front of him and was in thought. A doctor came up from the side. He told Van Liana that they were able to confirm the identity of the corpse. Van took the documents from the doctor. He examined them carefully and silently. The document announced the name of the corpse and its data. The guy was called Li Jiao, and he was 2002 years of birth. Van said that some of their goals continue to move. He noted to himself a fearless research spirit, which is worthy of admiration. The agent looked at the corpse and said that the guy was in the paradox zone. All this turned out to be very regrettable. Chin, with all her might, threw a schoolboy to the ground after his story. The captain angrily and displeasedly asked the guy, "Why did he kill?" Chin viciously looked at the student from top to bottom. She had tears in her eyes. People around stood and silently looked at Chin. The girl continued to ask the guy angrily, "Why did he kill a friend?" Chen silently looked at the upset girl in front of him. She was still in severe shock. The guy came up and behind the girl and said that he would help her rise. Chen turned around and very viciously shouted to her friend that the school children killed Lee. The captain reminded his friend that they had agreed on everything before. The girl sadly told the interlocutor that she had previously agreed with friends that they would go home, the three of them. Chen felt very sad. He was very sorry for his girlfriend. Suddenly, a loud scream rang out from the side. School children became worried. Lian said with fright to his friends that he was hearing someone's voice in the fog. The main character scaredly jumped to his feet. He asked who in front of them. Two guys quickly fled from the fog. They shouted that they needed help. Surprised school children scaredly sat on the ground and looked at each other. Voices from the fog were approaching. Two frightened young schoolboys fled. Chen looked with excitement to the side. The voice from the fog from strangers seemed to him familiar. Suddenly, the main character broke off and ran forward. Friends called him excitedly. The main character ran deep into the fog. He looked around with great excitement. Fan stood and looked around. He knew that somewhere there should be people. The main character felt that because of the fog, he could no longer go further. Fan saw that the running strangers were almost close to him. The stranger extended his hand from the fog to the guy and asked for help. The protagonist noticed that his frightened acquaintance stood in front of him. Fan was very amazed. He did not understand how his friend, whom he had seen before another place, might seem here. The main character held out his hand to his friend. He almost managed to grab him. Fu Lon fell sharply to the ground. It was as if something was holding him from behind. The main character scaredly called his friend. He still wanted to grab him with his hand. Fan was very amazed. He did not understand where Fu Lon could come from in this place. The main character was puzzled. He did not understand what was happening to him now. Fan realized that he needed to help his friends. He turned around and prepared to run. Lian was surprised. He could not understand why his friend was so frightened. The protagonist shouted in a frightened voice to his friends to run away as soon as possible. Once upon a time, a fisherman named Katara Fukushima lived in nature. There was a case when a fisherman saved a huge turtle on the seashore. Fukushima was invited as a guest to the palace of the King of the Dragons. He arrived there on the turtle. Before leaving, the daughter of the Dragon King handed the guy a jade box. Fukushima accepted the girl's gift. She told the guy to never open the box. When the fisherman returned to the village, he was surprised to notice that all the people's acquaintances were gone for him. Fukushima walked around the village, but none of the people around him knew him. The fisherman forgot the warning of the daughter of the King of the Dragons. He opened a jade box. Agent Van looked at the decomposed body of a person on the medical table. Van said that one sleepy night has passed for Fukushima, and decades have passed for ordinary mortals. Mitao looked thoughtfully. She said that she could understand it. The girl turned her gaze to the side of the schoolboy anomalous body. Mai asked her colleague what kind of body they now see in front of them. Van Lyon smiled thoughtfully to himself. He decided to explain everything now to the girl. The agent looked at his interlocutor and said that all this is another story. Sisyphe was the founder and king of Corinth. He was the most resourceful person on earth. It so happened that once the ruler Sisyphus revealed all the secrets of the gods. The king even managed to avoid death even after what he did. Sisyphe was an ordinary person. He failed to avoid the punishment of the gods. As a result, the gods expelled the Sisyphus to the borders of hell as a punishment. The former king was forced to push a huge stone up the slope to the top of the mountain. The stone was very heavy. As a result, Sisyphe always fell before he could reach the top. The former king must repeat a similar senseless work forever and ever. Van threw an apple on his hand. He said that even the ancient gods knew that the best punishment was useless and hopeless work. The agent looked at the guy's body. He said that he did not know what he had encountered on the other side. Van explained that at first, for the first time, the schoolboy entered the paradox zone. After that, the student fell into the cycle of helpless despair. It happened so that Lee was killed by his own knife from his friend. Agent Van explained that the student was in an endless death cycle. Van added that in the end, the schoolboy was in an endless cycle of fear. Van looked at the guy's body and told the girl that they now see the result of the fact that the endless cycle was forcibly compressed to one point. The agent with a smile explained that the body is a work of art that created time and space. Mitao answered a colleague that it was for the same reason that a paradox arises. Van looked at the girl and told her with a smile that she still does not understand everything. The guy said that the essence of history is not the punishment that the gods imposed on the Sisyphus. The agent decided to explain to the girl what the meaning of history is. Van explained that the essence of history is concluded in the highest gods who once punished Sisyphus. The main character fled with his friends in a deep fog. Around there was a very poor visibility. School children fled and could not see anything in front of themselves. Lion asked her friend in dismay, "What happened to them?" Fan fled silently and stared at him intently. He was completely focused. The main character fled and scaredly thought that the fog was pursuing them all. Lee tried to keep up with her friends. She did not notice how she stumbled on the stone at full speed and fell. The girl fell on the ground with the acceleration. She saw nothing in front of her. Xiaofei stopped. She noticed a lying girl and scaredly called her by name. A girlfriend shouted fearfully to the girl to get up as soon as possible. The main character approached a girlfriend and helped her rise from the ground. The main character was very surprised. He heard someone running behind. Sportsman Chin called her friends with a very frightened voice. Fan, along with his companion, fled at full speed along the lane in the fog. The main character supported the girl with his hand on the go. He shouted to friends to run as soon as possible. Suddenly, Chen appeared. He swung and prepared to throw something from himself. The main character, along with the girl, fled to meet his friends. Fan grabbed his girlfriend behind his head. He decided to help her bend. The main character, along with the girl, fell to the ground. The explosion rang out from behind and fire appeared. Li Yang was worried. He asked his friend, did he really abandon the explosives? Chen explained to the interlocutor that he prepared Molotov's cocktail from store products. The fat man was delighted. He told his friend that he had acted amazingly. Xiao asked the protagonist, what should they do now? She explained that the fire would stop enemies for a while. Fan thought and looked around. He needed to find a way out as soon as possible. The main character looked around. Everything around was in an unsightly fog. Fan pointed his finger to the side and told friends that they would go there now. A group of school children ran together in the direction of the entrance to the building. The protagonist shouted to friends to run straight to the second floor. At this time, someone stood at the top of the building in a black suit and carefully looked at people from below. The stranger in black clothes followed every movement of the students from the roof. The protagonist drove his friends so that they fled to the building quickly. Fan turned and told his friends excitedly so that they quickly closed all the windows and doors. Van scaredly shouted to a friend that if they hide here, they would just wait for their death. The main character reasonably explained to his friends that in the hospital building, they will have more chances to survive. Fan explained to his friends wary that he had an assumption. Chen answered a friend that he was clear to him. School children looked around the building. Chen approached the window and put her hand to the glass. She looked carefully into the street. Chen stood and looked very warily from the ward window to the street. Xiaofei stood near the window of the hospital. She peered out carefully. Chen walked around the hospital ward and told friends that the door to the toilet was closed. The main character looked excitedly in front of him. He told friends that something was approaching them. In the courtyard of the hospital, there was an impenetrable fog. School children carefully looked out. The students noticed how gradual enlightenment began on the street. The main character, along with the girl, noticed the rays of the light, which began to go to the hospital from the street. Chin, with great excitement and surprise, told friends that the fog was gone. Xiaofei looked closely at the window. She said that the fog simply disappeared. Chen was surprised to ask his friend, how did he learn about everything? The protagonist, with excitement, reminded his interlocutors of the fog. Fan explained that when he went to the rescue of Lo Si, the fog was very thick. There was no decomposition. Chen said thoughtfully that the past phenomenon was not caused by a corrosive substance in the fog. The guy looked at his friends and said that from the very beginning, they walked in the wrong direction. Fan told his friends that the most strange principle is the basis of this phenomenon. The main character looked out the window. He told friends that it was not clear what they were faced with this time. Fan very clearly remembered how he met his friends in the fog and tried to help them, holding out his hand. The main character returned and looked at school children. They were scared. Fan said reasonably to his friends that this world could be more complicated for them than they thought. The evening has come. Xiaofei decided to help her wounded girlfriend in the hospital. Xiao was in the ward with a schoolgirl. She asked if she was ready. A girlfriend carefully lubricated the wound with a cotton wool on her knee on the girl's leg. Li Si restrained her with all her strength to endure pain. She whipped softly. At this time, steps were heard from the side. Chen approached his friends. The main character told his friends that everything is in order from the other side of the building. Chen explained to his friends that they checked all the doors and the windows were closed. There should be no problems. The fat man tiredly told his friends that they will finally be able to relax. He added that he really wants to sleep. Fan looked silently to the side. He thought about something of his own. Chen looked with excitement to the side. He asked his friend, "What was wrong?" Fan looked at school children inside the ward. He said that he was worried about their condition. Chen looked reasonably at the students and said that something similar had already happened earlier. The main character thought. He thought how he and his friends to survive the next night. Fan went to the door of the ward. He told his friends that they would be on duty tonight. Liang and Chen with excitement looked at their friend and nodded to him as a sign. At night, the girls rested. Li lying on the bed next to her girlfriend Xiaofei. Chen could not fall asleep for a very long time. She sat on the bed and looked in front of her. The guy Chen was sitting on his bed. He held food and drinks in his hands. There was complete silence in the ward. The students rested on the beds and thought what to do before. Two guys ran into the room and shouted joyfully that they decided everything. The main character with friends carefully looked at school children. The students stood and held in their hands the assistant weapon. The guy said that it is very dangerous to stay in the hospital with a limited amount of food. He offered to go outside and fight face to face. Fan said reasonably to his friends to calm down and think well. The main character explained to friends that they did not even know what awaits them on the street. People did not even understand how dangerous fog is for them. It will simply be a suicide to run out into the street in such a situation. The schoolboy told the main character that he simply did not consider them members of the team. Chen turned around and looked at the girls. Girlfriends were silent in response. The guys prepared to leave. They called their friends ordinary cowards. The protagonist looked sadly and carefully after the departed friends. The main character told the girlfriends to collect things and leave with him. Fan explained to the girls that they will have more chances while their friends will attract the attention of an invisible enemy. Xiaofei thought about something. She excitedly turned to friends. The main character packed things in a backpack. Xiao asked a friend, would they really use school children as a bait? Fan stood and was silent. He did not answer his friends to their question. Chen explained to his friends that the main character had just tried to convince school children, but the students did not listen to them. They cannot worry about other people now, the school children thought. They realized that now they would have to leave alone. The girls went down to the warehouse to pick up their supplies. The students looked out on the shelves the necessary boxes and took them with them. Suddenly, a loud scream rang out on the side. The students were very scared. The main character, along with his friend, ran out of the ward to the corridor. Fan, along with Janem, looked frightenedly at the fog. They realized that something happened to their friends. The protagonist looked in front of him. He noticed the body of one of his friends. The body of the student was divided into several parts. Around there were a puddle of blood. Near the guy's body stood a killer. The main character peered carefully at the stranger. Near the guy's body was a killer in black clothes. In his hands was a bloodied knife. The killer stood near the guy's body with a knife in his hand. Blood was dripping from him. The frightened main character looked at the attacker. He could not understand who was hiding under black clothes. Fan examined with the excitement of the attacker. It seemed to him that he recognized him. The stranger raised his head and carefully looked at the guys on the balcony. Chen rushed aside. He realized that the attacker had noticed them. The schoolboy scaredly shouted to his friend that the stranger saw them. The criminal carefully looked at school children. He decided to go up to them. The main character noticed how a stranger in black clothes headed for the stairs. Fan scaredly thought to himself that the killer was climbing their balcony. Chen looked at the stairs with excitement. He listened carefully. The guys were carefully visible on the stairs. They noticed that the stranger was not there. The students decided to divide. The main character decided to go down. Fan at full speed rushed down the stairs. He hoped to see a stranger there. The main character carefully looked around. He noticed that the killer had gone somewhere. Fan looked around. He noted to himself that there are other smells around, in addition to blood. The guy went to a pool of blood. He carefully examined the body of the student. The main character noted to himself that the cuts on the victim's body are very neat. Suddenly, someone swung a chainsaw on the side and wanted to hit the guy. Fan, with a sharp movement to the side, dodged so that he would not be hooked with a saw. The main character noticed how a mutant with a chainsaw in his hand stood next to him. It was one of his friends. The main character scaredly stepped aside. He was able to evade a dangerous blow. Fan Lin looked closely. He realized that he sees in front of him a mutated friend, Wan Mina. The mutant angrily looked at the protagonist. He did not answer him. Fan looked at the monster in front of him. He did not understand why his friend became so. Van Ming raised the chainsaw up. He shouted to the guy that he would kill him now. The mutant accelerated and rushed to the protagonist with all his might. Van Ming swung a chainsaw to impress the protagonist. Fan sharply bounced back and dodged in time to the side of the blow. Van swung on top of a chainsaw to finish a person in front of him. The main character was scared. He realized that he could not just crush his opponent. At this time, someone on the side launched a vessel with a liquid behind in a monster. After the blow, the vessel crashed and the liquid hit and sprayed the mutant's body. Van Lin screamed angrily. The liquid was struck by his body. He was wounded. Due to the wound on the body of the monster, decomposition began. He screamed loudly. The mutant fell. One of his friends called with excitement by the name of the protagonist. Suddenly, the monster found himself in force and again jumped to his feet. Fan called his friend Chen in dismay. The monster began to recover very quickly. His forces returned to him. The mutant took a closer look. He noticed that, in the distance, there were still school children. Chen, very scared, shouted to his friends that the mutant noticed them. The monster looked angrily at people and shouted that he would kill them now. Chen looked scared at the protagonist. He realized that, I need to help the guy. The schoolboy ran to the side. He shouted to the girls to run and that he would distract the monster now. Chen looked angry in front of her. She realized that they would need to help a friend. The captain shouted frightened school children to follow her. Chen ran along the corridor with a bottle. It was followed by a monster with a chainsaw. The guy was scared. He felt that the mutant gradually catching him up. The monster swung his chainsaw to hit her schoolboy. Chen stumbled and fell to the floor. He released a bottle from his hands. The guy was scared. He realized that he would not be able to run away from the monster. The mutant was approaching. He held a chainsaw in his hands. The schoolboy tried to escape. The guy cramps began to rummage in his pockets. He wanted to find another bottle to run into the opponent. Chen understood with excitement that he had already used the last bottle. He was defenseless before the monster. The schoolboy was scared. He realized that he no longer had a way out and he could not fight back. Van stood with a raised chainsaw. He prepared to finish off a person. The man was scared. He realized that now the monster would make him his chainsaw. The monster stood in front of a frightened schoolboy. He shouted angrily that he would kill him now. Chen, because of fear, could not even say a single word. He decided that he had no chance of salvation. Van swung a chainsaw and shouted angrily to the man that he would kill him now. The mutant swung a chainsaw. He prepared to finish off the guy in front of him. At this time, the girl ran up on the side. She prepared to help the student. Chen from the dispersal rushed at the schoolboy and prepared to protect him. The monster was surprised to notice how the student covered her friend on the go. The girl, in an embrace with the guy, rolled away at full speed. Van looked aside and noticed that the school children were lying on the floor. Chen looked at the girl very scared. He did not expect her to help him. I suddenly found monsters into force and again decided to attack people. Chen grabbed her friend's hand. She scaredly warned him that the mutant was approaching. The protagonist looked with excitement from the side of how his friends tried to escape. Fan looked around and realized that the hall was very spacious. There is nowhere to hide or fight. The protagonist looked with excitement at the students running next to him. Fan called on the go of a running friend. Chen tried to escape. The main character shouted to the schoolboy to lead the monster behind him into the corridor. Chen and his girlfriend fled with all his might. They still tried to escape. The monster pursued people. The school children accelerated and ran to the stairs on the go. The mutant fled to school children and screamed angrily that he would kill them now. Chen ran upward up the stairs with his girlfriend. They were in a hurry. The guy looked scaredly aside. He noticed that the monster continued to pursue them. The schoolboy felt strong fatigue. He stopped to catch his breath at least a little. Chen stood and held his hand at the railing. He could no longer run further. Shin scaredly shouted to her tired friend so that he would not stop. The guy noticed that a monster was already approaching them. He decided to run further as soon as possible. The mutant rose up at the entire speed. He gradually approached school children. At this time, the main character appeared from the side. He swung a metal pipe. Fan, with all his might on a grand scale, hit the monster with a pipe on the head. The protagonist abruptly threw the rack on the floor. He prepared to run away. The mutant stopped and looked aside. He realized that there is another person next to him. The monster looked viciously at the protagonist and muttered that he would kill him now. Fan ran along the corridor at full speed. The monster looked angrily after him. Chen shouted excitedly to his girlfriend and invited her to divide. The guy headed down the stairs. The girl ran up at this time. The main character at full speed rushed along the corridor. A monster approached him from behind. Suddenly, Chen appeared in front of a mutant in the corridor. He decided to stop him. The monster rushed to the side sharply. Chen decided to flee and ran down the steps. At this time, Chen suddenly jumped out from behind the door. The mutant managed to notice her. The girl ran to the side. The mutant at this time decided to finish off Chan. The mutant shouted very viciously and loudly to people that he would now kill them all. Van Lin saw the guy in front of him and decided to catch him as soon as possible in the corridor. The mutant raced at full speed after the main character along the corridor. Fan turned on the go and noticed that the monster was beginning to catch him. The main character felt that the mutant from behind was getting closer and closer to him. Fan thought frightened to himself that the monster with a chainsaw was again accelerated. The main character raced with all his might. He needed to accelerate. The mutant wanted to hit the guy on a grand scale. He dodged and the monster hit the wall. One of his friends asked the protagonist with fear, "Is he all right?" Fan shouted excitedly to his friend to find sulfuric acid. Chen stood next to the girl. They looked with excitement at the protagonist. The guy climbed into his backpack. He decided to try to find the remaining acids. Chen thought to himself very scared that he had already used up all the remains of acid. People looked at each other with excitement. They did not know what to do now. The monster stood near the wall where it was a chainsaw. At this time, someone threw a burning lighter from above. Fan looked at the burning lighter with fright. He did not understand where she came from. The lighter almost fell down. The main character realized that an explosion is now possible. Fan was scared. He shouted loudly to his friends to run away. The lighter fell to the floor, and after that, there was a very strong explosion. Girls along with their friend ran out of the hospital building. Everything around was in the fog. Xiao carefully looked around. She told her friends that the fog around them is very thick. The girl said that there is a monster next to them. She invited friends to find a place where to hide. The students walked together in the fog. They carefully looked around. The school children headed aside. Losi was very scared. The girl told her girlfriend so that she was not afraid. The fat man stopped. He said scared to his companions that there was something in front of them. Xiaofei stopped. She noticed the outlines of a large monster in front of her. School children were frightened. They noticed a dangerous monster in the fog in a fog. The students were scared. One of them shouted that the monster was approaching them. The fat man was frightened and worried. He realized that they need to escape now. The girls looked at the fat man with their skill. The guy rushed boldly forward. Leon blocked the monster. He shouted to his girlfriends to run away as soon as possible. The girls were worried. They did not know what to do. They no longer had the strength to run. Xiaofei stood in fright. She felt that she could not escape. The schoolgirl was scared due to the fact that she could not move. The fat man stood in front of the girls. They could not even budge. The monster angrily looked at people in front of him. School children did not have time to escape. Lion looked in a frightened monster in front of him. He still wanted to protect his girlfriends. The guy saw the dangerous white tentacles stretched to him from the monster. Liang, with fright, noticed how one of the tentacles approached him to his face. School children stood and looked at the building in front of them, very scared. There was a very powerful explosion. The building began to collapse into pieces. Liang stood and looked at the tentacle in front of him, very scared. He could not run away. The fat man, scared. He did not know how to escape from the monster. Suddenly, the monster disappeared somewhere. After the explosion, school children fell to the ground. Xiaofei was very surprised. She could not understand who saved her now. The girl saw a strong and powerful explosion in front of her. She was scared. The students stood together and looked in fright at the burning hotel in front of them. Liang, along with his girlfriends, scaredly looked in front of him at the burning building. Lo Si, with excitement, remembered that their friends were inside the destroyed hospital. The girl scaredly called the protagonist. She realized that the guy could die in the building. Lo Si decided to run away to the wreckage of the building. Xiao shouted to her friend so that she would not go anywhere, as it is very dangerous. Lo Si ran forward. She noticed how the main character appeared in her dust clubs in front of her. Fan looked at his girlfriend and asked calmly, "Did she suffer?" The girl joyfully hugged the main character. The fat man told his friend that it is very good, that he is in perfect order. Lion turned around and asked the protagonist where the guy Chin and his girlfriend Chin went. The main character thought. He squeezed his hand into his fist and did not know what to answer his friend. Fan decided to tell his interlocutor about the fate of his friends. The main character at the last moment shouted to his friends to run away, as the building would explode. After the most powerful explosion, the guy was thrown aside. He did not see what happened to the school children. Fan lay on the ground unconscious. He began to come to his senses with difficulty. The schoolboy woke up. He did not know if his friends could be saved. He was hurt. After the explosion, Fan got up and sat on the ground. He decided to look around. The main character with excitement called his friends by names. There was a fire around. Fan noticed how another strong explosion was heard on the wreckage of the building. The schoolboy was frightened to himself that the hospital begins to crumble. The main character accelerated and ran aside with all his might to protect himself. The student realized that his friends remained inside. He could no longer help them. There was another very strong explosion. Fire clubs appeared behind. Fan, with an exciting look, explained to his friends what happened to other school children. Xiaofei joyfully looked at his friend and said that they could try to find school children. The fat man reminded that the guy Chen is very smart and the girl Chin is very sports. The main character thought. He realized that they could go and look for school children. The students walked around the ruins and looked around. They called their friends by name. The fat man said in displeasure that he could not find traces of friends. Xiao carefully looked around. The main character thought. He did not know what to do in such a situation. Fan said with excitement to his friends that they should leave here as soon as possible. They will leave a backpack with the necessary food. If their friends are alive, then they will find a way to get out to the east of the city. School children obeyed their friend with excitement. They decided to agree. The students left a backpack with food. They turned around and began to leave. After some time, someone went to the bag of food and carefully looked at it. The students walked around the city with surprise, examined him. They were surprised. The guy looked around. He did not understand how this could be possible. The student looked in the store and noticed that the burnt shelves had turned into new ones. School children could not understand how the store could recover after the fire. Van thoughtfully told his friends that the charred regiments are just part of the incredible. One of the students said observations that the food that they had previously taken was also replenished. A girl Shen entered the store. She said she checked the shopping center. The student cunningly told her friends that everything was updated in the shopping center. The student looked at the shelves with the goods. He said that as if someone was replenishing for them. The guy thought and was amazed. He decided to understand what it all means. The guy began to recall how they had previously scored in stores. The schoolboy said to his friends in a surprised voice that they now have endless supplies. The students were delighted. Some of them said that now you do not need to worry about food. Drink thoughtfully stood at the counter. One of the guys went to his friend Peiji and put his hand on his shoulder. The guy told the student that they needed to step aside and talk about something. Drink looked displeased at the interlocutor and said that he could speak. A schoolboy with a cigarette told the interlocutor that he wants to talk with him alone. Drink looked after his acquaintance. He decided to go outside with him. The student sat down with a friend on a bench. He said that he could tell him everything. The guy turned to the interlocutor and said that he would tell him everything. The schoolboy pulled out a piece of glass at night and was the first to stand on the shift. Before that, Drink told your friends that they would all be on duty in turn. In a glass lay twisted pieces of paper. The one who extends a piece of security will be on duty. One of the students took a piece of paper from a glass. He had to become a guard at night. The guy carefully and with a studying gaze looked at a piece of paper in front of him. The student at first decided that he was not lucky, but then he was very seriously reacted to this. Drink asked his friend with interest if the supermarket changed when he was on duty there. The guy said that the burnt shelves were the same. There was no missing food either. In the middle of the night, the guard decided to leave and move to the toilet for a while. When the guy returned to the supermarket, everything changed very much there. The schoolboy was surprised. He carefully examined the store showcases in front of him. The guy looked at the supermarket and noticed that everything was already in order there. They were full of goods on the shelves. Drink asked a friend with interest, "Has the supermarket changed in just a couple of minutes?" The student replied that he himself was in shock. The guy slyly answered the interlocutor that he was guessing what happened. Drink looked very carefully at your friend. He realized that he had guessed something. The schoolboy prepared to get up from his seat. He told a friend that he knew everything. Drink explained to the interlocutor that he provided important information. He asked his friend if he told anyone else about it. The guy confidently answered the student that he had no more told anyone about it. The student told the interlocutor that it was necessary to keep silent about everything that happened so far. Drink patted his friend on the shoulder. He said that if they would tell other students about everything, an unnecessary panic would begin. The student looked at Peiji. He decided to contact him with some request. The guy told the interlocutor that he coped very well with the task. The student served his hands, but still did not dare to ask for something from a friend. The guy looked at the interlocutor and said cunningly that he should know what he has in mind. Drink told the interlocutor that he would meet him tonight. Drink said with a smile goodbye to the guy that they will talk in more detail in the evening.